Whispers on the Prairie Wind. Montana Territory, 1879. The untamed land stretched toward the horizon, a tapestry of golden prairie grass and distant mountains that seemed to touch the sky. The frontier was a place where dreams either took root or withered and died beneath the relentless sun. For Virgil Xavier, it was the only home he'd ever wanted, even as it tested a man's resolve with every passing season. At 26, Virgil had already lived several lifetimes by Eastern standards. His ranch, modest but growing, represented everything he'd fought to build since arriving in Montana with nothing but determination and the clothes on his back. The cruel winters and blistering summers had etched fine lines around his eyes, but they had yet to diminish his youthful vigor or the quiet strength that defined him. Standing on the porch of his cabin, Virgil surveyed his kingdom, 200 acres of prime grazing land nestled in a valley protected by gentle slopes to the north and west. The early morning sunlight gilded the landscape, casting long shadows across the yard where several children played under the watchful eye of Mrs. Tanner, the widow who helped look after them. Virgil ran a hand through his dark hair, pushing it back from a face that women in town described as handsome, though he paid such talk little mind. His lean build belied his strength, honed from years of breaking horses and working from sunrise to sunset. The light stubble on his jaw was the result of 3 days on the range rather than any deliberate choice. Mr. Xavier, 6-year-old Timmy came running across the yard, his patched trousers dusty at the knees. Samuel's climbing the corral fence again. Virgil sighed, stepping down from the porch. I suppose I better handle that before he ends up under a horse's hooves. This was his life now, a strange combination of rancher and reluctant father figure to 5 orphaned children who had landed in his care through a series of tragedies and circumstances beyond his control. It wasn't the life he had planned, but then again, the frontier rarely respected a man's plans. The first had been little Emma, now 9, whose parents had been killed in a wagon accident 3 years ago. Virgil had been the one to find the overturned wagon and the sobbing child. With no relatives to claim her and the nearest orphanage 200 miles away, he'd taken her in temporarily. Then came the Campbell brothers, Samuel and Timmy, whose father had worked for Virgil until pneumonia claimed him last winter. 8-year-old Rose and her toddler brother Michael had arrived 6 months ago when their mother, a widow working at the general store, succumbed to fever. Each time, Virgil told himself it was only until proper arrangements could be made. Each time, those arrangements never materialized, and the children became more firmly entrenched in his life. The frontier is no place for roots, Virgil muttered to himself, a mantra he'd adopted after watching his parents struggle and ultimately fail to tame this unforgiving land. A man survives out here by staying light, staying free. Yet here he was, anchored by 5 young lives that depended on him, even as he convinced himself it was all temporary. One day he'd find them proper homes with real families. One day he'd reclaim the independence that was a cowboy's birthright. Samuel, he called, spotting the 8-year-old perched precariously on the top rail of the corral. What did I tell you about climbing that fence? The boy's shoulders slumped as he carefully made his way down. That horse's kick and I could get my head cracked open like an egg. And is that something you're keen on experiencing today? Virgil asked, crossing his arms. No, sir, Samuel mumbled, scuffing his boot in the dirt. Virgil knelt down to the boy's level. I need you in one piece, Samuel, who's going to help me repair the chicken coop if you're laid up with a broken arm or worse. The boy's face brightened at the responsibility. We're still doing that today. After your lessons with Mrs. Tanner, Virgil tousled the boy's sandy hair, now go get some breakfast. As Samuel ran off toward the house, Virgil felt that familiar tightness in his chest, the constant battle between the attachment growing with each passing day and his deep-seated belief that permanence was a fool's dream in a land that could take everything from a man in an instant. He turned his attention back to the day's work, determined to maintain some semblance of the life he'd planned before becoming guardian to 5 unexpected wards. His future was clear to him. Build the ranch into something substantial, eventually hire enough hands to run it, and then, well, the then had always been vague, perhaps travel, see something beyond these valleys and mountains. The only certainty was that his vision had never included becoming a family man. Family was vulnerability, and vulnerability got you killed on the frontier. His own parents had proven that, clinging to their failing farm until illness took his mother and despair claimed his father shortly after. Virgil had been 17 then, old enough to make his way but young enough to learn the cruel lesson: love was a luxury ill-suited to survival in the West. By mid-morning, Virgil was checking fence lines in the east pasture, a task that allowed him precious solitude. The rhythmic pounding of fence posts into unyielding earth provided a meditative counterpoint to the chaos of the house. Out here, with only the wind and occasional call of a hawk for company, he could almost recapture the freedom he craved. The sound of an approaching rider pulled him from his thoughts. Squinting against the sun, he made out the figure of Tom Reynolds, his nearest neighbor, galloping toward him with unusual urgency. "Virgil," Tom called, reining his horse to a stop in a cloud of dust, "you need to get to town." Stage was attacked about 10 miles out, 3 dead, several injured. Doc Henderson's asking for every able body to help. Virgil's stomach tightened. Indian trouble. Road agents. Trying to rob the strongbox, from what I heard. Tom wiped sweat from his brow. "I'm heading back now with my wagon for the wounded." Virgil nodded grimly. "I'll follow as soon as I get back to the house." As Tom rode off, Virgil gathered his tools quickly. Attacks on the stage weren't common in these parts anymore, but the lawlessness that defined the territory's early days still flared occasionally, a reminder that civilization remained a thin veneer over wilderness. Riding hard back to the ranch, Virgil found Mrs. Tanner on the porch, already aware of the situation from another neighbor who had passed by. "Go," she said firmly before he could speak. "I'll stay with the children overnight if needed." Virgil nodded gratefully, taking only enough time to change horses and grab his rifle. Within 20 minutes he was galloping toward town, dust billowing behind him like a comet's tail. Galton Creek had grown considerably in the 5 years since Virgil had settled nearby. What had once been little more than a trading post now boasted a main street with a dozen businesses, including Doc Henderson's clinic, where a crowd had already gathered by the time Virgil arrived. Sheriff Miller was organizing men to return to the attack site for the dead and to hunt for the attackers, while others helped carry the wounded into the clinic or the hotel across the street, which was serving as an overflow. "Xavier," the sheriff acknowledged as Virgil dismounted. "I need men with clear heads. You and Daniels take the hotel, Doc's sending the less critical cases over." For the next several hours, Virgil worked alongside the town's residents, carrying stretchers, fetching water, and holding down thrashing men as the doctor's assistant extracted bullets. The smell of blood and ether hung heavy in the air, mingling with moans of pain and the hushed prayers of those waiting to learn if loved ones would survive. It was near dusk when Virgil stepped onto the hotel porch for a moment of fresh air, his shirt stained with other men's blood. The setting sun painted the street in deep orange and long shadows, a beautiful conclusion to an ugly day. "Excuse me," a soft voice came from behind him. "Are you going back inside? I need help with a patient who's becoming restless." Virgil turned to find a young woman he didn't recognize standing in the doorway. Even in the dim light, her beauty was striking, not the painted prettiness of saloon girls, but something more refined yet equally resilient. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a simple chignon, though several strands had escaped to frame a face that spoke of gentle determination. Her dress, once a soft blue, was now marred with bloodstains, and fatigue lined her eyes, yet she carried herself with composed dignity. "Of course," he replied, following her back into the converted lobby where cots had been arranged in rows. "Which one?" "The elderly gentleman by the window," she said, leading the way. "He keeps trying to get up. I believe he's confused from the head wound." Together, they managed to calm the disoriented man, securing him more comfortably on his cot. Virgil noticed the practiced efficiency of her movements as she checked the bandage and offered water to the patient. "You've done this before," he observed once they stepped away. "I trained as a nurse during the war," she replied, straightening her apron, "though I was quite young at the time." Virgil studied her more carefully. She couldn't be older than 23 or 24, which would indeed have made her very young during the conflict that had torn the nation apart over a decade ago. "I don't believe we've met," he said. "I'm Virgil Xavier. My ranch is about 10 miles east of town." Hope Caldwell, she responded with a slight smile that softened her exhausted features. I arrived on yesterday's stage from Chicago. I'm to be the new school teacher. Then you're fortunate you weren't on today's coach, Virgil remarked, immediately regretting the bluntness of his words. Yes, she agreed soberly. Though I can't help feeling that my good fortune came at the expense of others. Before Virgil could respond, Doc Henderson appeared, his sleeves rolled up and his beard still flecked with blood despite attempts to clean it. Miss Caldwell, the doctor addressed her, your assistance has been invaluable. I hadn't expected the town's new teacher to come with medical skills. 3 years in a Chicago hospital teaches one a great deal, she replied modestly. Indeed, we've stabilized the critical patients at the clinic, Doc Henderson continued, but I'd like to keep watch on these fellows through the night. Could I impose upon you to stay until morning? Of course, she agreed without hesitation. Xavier, the doctor turned to Virgil, sheriff's organized a posse to go after the road agents at first light. He's asking for volunteers who know the territory. Virgil nodded, though his gaze lingered on the new arrival. There was something compelling about the quiet competence she displayed, so at odds with her delicate appearance. I should check on my horse, he said finally. I'll be back to help through the night. Outside in the cooling evening air, Virgil tried to shake off the strange feeling that had settled over him. Hope Caldwell was certainly beautiful, but he had seen beautiful women before without this odd sense of recognition, as though they had met in some previous life. Perhaps it was simply the intensity of the day, the shared experience of blood and pain creating false intimacy. Regardless, she was the town's new schoolteacher, and he was a rancher with 5 orphans temporarily in his care. Their paths might cross occasionally in a town as small as Galton Creek, but nothing more, and that was precisely how it should be. When Virgil returned to the hotel after tending to his horse and sending word to Mrs. Tanner that he would be staying in town overnight, he found Hope Caldwell sitting beside an elderly woman, speaking in soft tones that seemed to calm the patient's distress. Throughout the night they worked in tandem, rarely needing to exchange words as they moved from patient to patient. By the time dawn broke over the eastern plains, casting long golden fingers through the hotel windows, Virgil had developed a grudging respect for the schoolteacher's stamina and resolve. The worst is behind us, Doc Henderson announced as he completed his morning rounds. Miss Caldwell, Mr. Xavier, I can't thank you enough for your assistance. Hope smiled tiredly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I'm glad I could help. You should get some rest, Virgil told her, noticing the dark circles beneath her eyes. The posse's gathering soon and I need to join them. Be careful, she said simply. I've seen enough wounds in the last day to last a lifetime. There was something in her gaze, concern for a stranger she had known less than a day, that unsettled him. Virgil merely nodded before stepping out into the morning light, where Sheriff Miller was already organizing the posse in the street. Xavier, the sheriff called, glad you're joining us. You know the eastern trails better than most. 12 men rode out of Galton Creek that morning, following the stage road before veering north where tracks indicated the attackers had fled. They were a determined group, most having spent the night tending to the wounded or comforting the bereaved. The 3 passengers who had died, a drummer from St. Louis, an elderly couple returning from visiting relatives back east, were people the town had known, if only in passing, and their deaths had struck a personal chord. As they rode, Virgil found his thoughts repeatedly drifting to Hope Caldwell. There was a story there, he sensed, a young woman with nursing experience from the war who had worked in a Chicago hospital and now found herself teaching school in Montana Territory. People came west for many reasons, but most were running either toward something or away from something. He wondered which category she fell into. Something on your mind, Xavier? Sheriff Miller asked as he guided his horse alongside Virgil's. Just focusing on the trail, Virgil replied, embarrassed to be caught wool-gathering during a manhunt. The sheriff grunted skeptically but didn't press the issue. Tracks are getting fresher. We're gaining on them. By mid-afternoon, they spotted smoke from a campfire in a sheltered draw ahead. The sheriff halted the posse, sending 2 men to circle around while the rest approached cautiously from the front. What followed was brief but violent. The road agents, 4 men who had clearly not expected pursuit to come so quickly, were caught unprepared. Two surrendered immediately when faced with overwhelming odds. One reached for his weapon and was shot dead by the sheriff. The fourth attempted to flee on horseback but was brought down by Virgil's well-aimed rifle shot, wounded but alive. "Found the strongbox," one of the men called, holding up the metal container that had cost 3 lives, still locked tight. As they secured the prisoners and prepared to return to town, Virgil felt the hollow victory that always followed violence, necessary though it sometimes was. Justice had been served, but it wouldn't bring back the dead or erase the memories of those who had survived the attack. The ride back to Galton Creek was somber, the initial rush of the chase replaced by weary contemplation. They arrived as dusk was settling over the town, a small crowd gathering as they rode down the main street with their prisoners and recovered strongbox. "I need to get back to my ranch," Virgil told the sheriff after they had delivered the prisoners to the jail. "I've got children waiting." Sheriff Miller looked surprised. "Children? Since when did you become a family man, Xavier?" "I'm not," Virgil replied firmly. "Just looking after some orphans until proper arrangements can be made." The sheriff's knowing smile suggested he didn't entirely believe this explanation, but he simply clapped Virgil on the shoulder. "Well, my thanks for your help today. Town appreciates it." As Virgil headed toward the livery to collect his horse, he caught sight of a familiar figure emerging from the hotel, Hope Caldwell, looking somewhat rested though still wearing the same blood-stained dress from the previous day. She spotted him at the same moment, changing direction to approach him. "You're back safely," she observed with evident relief. "Were you successful?" "We caught them," he confirmed, suddenly aware of his dusty, travel-worn appearance. "2 alive for trial, 2 won't trouble anyone again." Hope nodded soberly. "I suppose that's the justice of the frontier." "It's the only justice we have out here sometimes," Virgil replied, more defensively than he'd intended. A slight frown creased her brow, but she didn't argue the point. "All the patients at the hotel are stable now. Dr. Henderson says they should recover fully, given time." "That's good news," Virgil said, fumbling for something more to say. "Are you settled in town yet?" "Not entirely," she admitted with a small smile. "I arrived only yesterday, and circumstances haven't allowed for much settling. I'm staying at Mrs. Whittaker's boarding house until the school term begins next month." An awkward silence fell between them, neither quite ready to part ways, yet neither knowing how to continue the conversation. "I should be going," Virgil finally said. "I've got children waiting at home." Hope's expression registered surprise. "Children?" "Not mine," he clarified quickly. "Orphans I'm looking after temporarily." "How many?" she asked, genuine interest warming her voice. "5," Virgil admitted, somewhat embarrassed by the number. "It's a long story." "It sounds like one worth hearing someday," she replied, and there was something in her tone, not pity but a kind of respectful curiosity, that caught him off guard. "Perhaps," he conceded. "Welcome to Galton Creek, Miss Caldwell, though I'm sorry your arrival coincided with such tragedy." "Thank you, Mr. Xavier. I hope our next meeting comes under more pleasant circumstances." As Virgil rode home through the gathering darkness, he found himself replaying their conversation. There was something about Hope Caldwell that unsettled his carefully ordered existence, a quality he couldn't quite name, but that tugged at the edges of convictions he had long held as immutable. The ranch was quiet when he arrived, only a lamp burning in the front window to guide him home. Mrs. Tanner met him at the door, relief evident on her weathered face. "The children have been worried sick," she informed him in a hushed voice. "They're all asleep now, but they waited up as long as they could." "How did they hear about the attack?" Virgil asked, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. "News travels fast, even out here," Mrs. Tanner replied with a shrug. "Little Emma was convinced you'd been shot dead." Guilt squeezed Virgil's chest. He hadn't considered how the children would react to his extended absence or the news of violence so close to home. It was yet another reminder of the responsibilities he had assumed, however reluctantly. "I'll explain everything to them in the morning," he promised. "Thank you for staying with them, Mrs. Tanner." After the older woman had departed for her own cabin a short distance away, Virgil moved quietly through the house, checking on each sleeping child. Emma and Rose shared one room, the boys another. In the soft glow of the lamp he carried, their faces looked impossibly young and vulnerable, stirring that familiar conflict within him, the desire to protect them warring with his conviction that attachment only led to pain in the end. This is temporary, he reminded himself as he finally sought his own bed, just until proper homes can be found. But as sleep claimed him, it was not the children who occupied his final conscious thoughts, but rather a pair of intelligent eyes in a face framed by dark brown hair, and a voice that somehow managed to be both gentle and resolute at once. The following weeks brought a return to routine at the Xavier Ranch. The children attended to their lessons with Mrs. Tanner in the mornings and helped with age-appropriate chores in the afternoons. Virgil focused on preparing for the coming winter, repairing outbuildings, stocking supplies, and ensuring the cattle were healthy before the first snows arrived. Yet despite his best efforts to maintain the emotional distance he believed necessary, Virgil found himself increasingly drawn into the children's lives. He listened to 8-year-old Rose read aloud in the evenings, her small finger tracing each word carefully. He taught Samuel basic carpentry skills as they built a new chicken coop. He found himself carrying 3-year-old Michael on his shoulders during walks to check the fence lines, the boy's delighted giggles becoming a sound he unconsciously looked forward to. And through it all, he maintained the fiction that their arrangement was temporary, even as the children's possessions accumulated, and their presence transformed the spare bachelor's cabin into something that increasingly resembled a home. It was nearly 3 weeks after the stage attack when circumstances conspired to bring Hope Caldwell back into Virgil's life. The monthly supply run to town coincided with Timmy developing a worrying cough that prompted Virgil to seek Doc Henderson's opinion. With all 5 children loaded into the wagon, he couldn't leave any behind with Mrs. Tanner away visiting her sister. They set out for Galton Creek on a crisp September morning. The town had largely recovered from the tragedy, though a newly posted reward notice for information about any remaining members of the road agent gang suggested the sheriff remained vigilant. Virgil's first stop was the doctor's office, where he was informed that Doc Henderson was delivering a baby at a ranch 5 miles west but would return by afternoon. "We'll come back later," Virgil told a disappointed Timmy. "Let's get our supplies first." The general store was busier than usual, and as Virgil helped the children down from the wagon, he cautioned them to stay close and not touch anything they weren't buying. It was an instruction he delivered every visit and one that was inevitably ignored within minutes. "Mr. Xavier," Mrs. Peterson, the storekeeper's wife, greeted them warmly, "and all your little brood." What a lovely surprise. Virgil winced at the word brood, which implied a permanence he wasn't prepared to acknowledge. "Just the monthly supplies, Mrs. Peterson. And perhaps some hard candy for the children if they behave," he added, with a meaningful look at his charges that produced immediate promises of angelic conduct. As he consulted his list with Mrs. Peterson, the bell above the door chimed and a familiar voice filled the store. "Good morning, Mrs. Peterson. I was hoping you had received those primers I ordered for the school." Virgil turned to find Hope Caldwell standing in the doorway, the sunlight behind her creating a halo effect around her slender form. She was dressed more formally than when he had last seen her, in a forest green dress with modest lace at the collar and cuffs, her hair arranged in a neat bun at the nape of her neck. At 22 years old she possessed a mature composure that belied her youth. "Miss Caldwell," Mrs. Peterson exclaimed. "Yes, indeed, they arrived on yesterday's stage, and look who else is here, Mr. Xavier and his children." Hope's gaze shifted to Virgil, surprise and pleasure mingling in her expression. "Mr. Xavier, how nice to see you again." Her eyes moved to the children clustered around him, and her smile widened. "And these must be the children you mentioned." Before Virgil could respond, Emma stepped forward with the natural confidence of a 9-year-old girl. "I'm Emma," she announced, "and that's Rose, and the boys are Samuel, Timmy, and Michael." "Are you the new teacher?" Hope knelt to the child's level, something Virgil had noticed she did with patience as well, a way of equalizing rather than towering over those who were vulnerable or smaller. "I am indeed, Miss Caldwell. And I'm very pleased to meet you, Emma." "Are we going to your school?" Samuel asked, edging closer with undisguised curiosity. Virgil cleared his throat. That depends on whether Miss Caldwell accepts pupils who live outside town limits. And on other factors, he added, reluctant to commit to any arrangement that suggested permanence. The school welcomes all children within riding distance, Hope replied diplomatically, rising to her full height again. The term begins in 2 weeks. We're fortunate that the previous teacher, Miss Abernathy, left excellent records, so I know exactly which lessons each returning pupil was completing. We ain't never been to proper school, Timmy piped up, then immediately dissolved into a fit of coughing that drew concerned looks from both adults. Hope frowned, moving closer to the boy. That sounds painful. How long has he had this cough? 3 days, Virgil replied, resting a protective hand on Timmy's shoulder. We're here to see Doc Henderson, but he's out delivering a baby. Hope placed a gentle hand on Timmy's forehead. He's running a slight fever. Has he been coughing up anything? Some yellow phlegm this morning, Virgil admitted, impressed despite himself at her professional assessment. It might be bronchitis, Hope suggested. I've seen similar cases. Has he been exposed to anyone ill recently? Virgil thought back over the past week. Mrs. Tanner, who helps with the children, mentioned her sister's family had been down with colds. Hope nodded thoughtfully. I have some herbal preparations at my boarding house that might help ease his symptoms until the doctor can examine him. It's what we used at the hospital when medications were in short supply. That's very kind, but we wouldn't want to impose, Virgil began, his instinctive wariness of accepting help warring with concern for Timmy. It's no imposition, Hope assured him. In fact, why don't you finish your shopping while I take Timmy to get the medicine? My boarding house is just down the street. With your permission, of course, she added, clearly sensitive to overstepping. Virgil hesitated, looking down at Timmy's flushed face and hearing the wheezing in his chest. All right, he conceded, but only if Timmy's comfortable going with you. The boy nodded eagerly, clearly taken with the kind-faced teacher. I'll go, Mr. Virgil. I'll bring him right back, Hope promised, offering her hand to Timmy, who took it without hesitation. As they left the store, Virgil found himself the target of Mrs. Peterson's knowing smile. Miss Caldwell is a godsend to this town, the older woman remarked, not just a teacher but trained in medicine too. And unmarried, she added with a significant arch of her eyebrow. I need 50 pounds of flour and 20 of sugar, Virgil replied, pointedly ignoring the implication. And coffee, if you've got any that wasn't ground last century. Mrs. Peterson chuckled but allowed the subject change, helping him assemble his supplies while the remaining children explored the store's treasures under the watchful eye of Mr. Peterson, who had emerged from the storeroom. By the time Virgil had completed his purchases and arranged for them to be loaded into his wagon, Hope had returned with Timmy, who was clutching a small paper packet and looking considerably cheerier. Miss Caldwell gave me medicine that tastes like licorice, he announced proudly, and she showed me a book with pictures of elephants. The medicine is a herbal tea blend, Hope explained to Virgil. It should help loosen the congestion and reduce the fever, 3 times daily, steeped for 5 minutes. And yes, I may have also shown him my illustrated natural history book, she added with a smile. He expressed an interest in animals. That's very kind of you, Virgil said, genuinely grateful. What do we owe you for the medicine? Hope waved away the suggestion. Nothing at all. I brought a good supply of herbs with me from Chicago, knowing they might be scarce here. An awkward silence fell between them, broken by Emma tugging at Virgil's sleeve. Can Miss Caldwell come have dinner with us sometime? She said she's all alone at her boarding house. Virgil shot the girl a mildly reproving look for putting him on the spot, but Hope saved him from having to respond by kneeling down to Emma's level again. That's very sweet of you to ask, Emma, but Mr. Xavier is a busy man and I have many preparations to make before school begins, perhaps another time. We should check if Doc Henderson has returned, Virgil said, grateful for the excuse to end the increasingly complicated interaction. Thank you again for your help with Timmy, Miss Caldwell. My pleasure, she replied, and there was something in her gaze, a mixture of understanding and perhaps a touch of regret, that suggested she recognized his discomfort and respected his boundaries. I hope to see all of you when school begins. As they left the store, Virgil couldn't help glancing back to see Hope selecting her primers from Mrs. Peterson, her expression animated as she discussed some point about the books. There was a vibrancy about her, an intelligent enthusiasm that seemed to brighten the mundane surroundings of the general store. "I like Miss Caldwell," Rose declared as they walked toward the doctor's office. "She smells nice, like flowers and clean things." "And she knows about elephants," Timmy added, clearly still impressed by this revelation. Virgil made a noncommittal sound, uncomfortable with the children's obvious approval of the teacher. It suggested attachments forming, expectations developing, precisely the emotional entanglements he had tried to avoid for all of them. Doc Henderson had indeed returned and, after examining Timmy, confirmed Hope's assessment of bronchitis. "Got some proper medicine for him," the doctor said, handing Virgil a small bottle. "Though I hear Miss Caldwell already provided some herbal remedy. She's quite knowledgeable, trained at one of the best hospitals in Chicago before coming west." "So I gathered," Virgil replied neutrally. "Will Timmy be all right?" "With rest and medicine, certainly. Keep him warm and push fluids." The doctor glanced at the other children who were exploring his waiting room with undisguised curiosity. "They all look healthy otherwise." "You're doing a fine job with them, Xavier." "It's temporary," Virgil said automatically, his standard response whenever anyone implied he had become a permanent guardian to the orphans. Doc Henderson's expression suggested he had his doubts about this assertion, but he merely nodded. "Of course, that'll be 50 cents for the medicine." The journey home was uneventful, with Timmy dozing against Virgil's shoulder as he drove the wagon, the medicine already easing his symptoms. The other children chattered about the excitement of town and the prospect of attending school, a discussion that prompted a mixture of pride and apprehension in Virgil. School meant further integration into the community, another step away from the temporary arrangement he insisted their situation remained. Yet watching the animated faces of Emma and Rose as they debated which subjects they might excel at, and seeing Samuel's quiet determination as he practiced his letters in the dust of the wagon bed, Virgil felt an unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest. These children had endured loss and uncertainty, yet they approached the future with hope and enthusiasm, a stark contrast to his own careful emotional restraint. As the ranch came into view, the setting sun gilding the modest buildings with golden light, Virgil found himself unexpectedly thinking of Hope Caldwell again. There was something about her calm competence, her way of meeting challenges directly without drama or complaint, that reminded him of the qualities valued on the frontier. Yet there was a gentleness to her as well, an empathy that suggested strength rather than weakness. "Mr. Virgil," Emma's voice interrupted his thoughts, "if we go to Miss Caldwell's school, can we invite her for Sunday dinner sometime? Mrs. Peterson says she eats all alone at her boarding house, and that's not right." Virgil sighed, guiding the team toward the barn. "We'll see, Emma. Let's focus on getting settled in school first." But even as he deflected the child's request, a small, traitorous part of him wondered what it might be like to see Hope Caldwell seated at his table, her intelligent eyes animated in conversation, her presence brightening the simple cabin as she had brightened the general store. The thought was disconcerting enough that he pushed it firmly aside, focusing instead on the immediate tasks of unloading supplies and settling the children for the evening. The frontier was no place for romantic notions, he reminded himself. Survival demanded practicality and emotional discipline, lessons he had learned the hard way and had no intention of forgetting. Yet as he tucked the children into their beds that night, listening to their prayers and soothing their small worries, Virgil couldn't help wondering if the barriers he had so carefully constructed around his heart were beginning to crack, not just because of 5 orphaned children who were worming their way into his affections, but also because of a brown-haired schoolteacher with knowing eyes and a quiet strength that matched his own. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Virgil prepared the children for school. There were clothes to be mended or replaced, basic supplies to be purchased, and skills to be assessed. Mrs. Tanner, who had been providing rudimentary education at the ranch, assured Virgil that all except little Michael were ready for formal schooling. "Emma reads at nearly a 5th grade level," the older woman reported proudly. "And Samuel has a natural aptitude for mathematics. Rose and Timmy will need more help with their letters, but they're eager learners." Virgil nodded, watching through the window as the children played in the yard. Will they be behind the others? He asked, a protective instinct surfacing that surprised him with its intensity. Mrs. Tanner patted his arm reassuringly. They'll do just fine, and from what I hear, Miss Caldwell is an excellent teacher. Very patient with children who need extra assistance. The mention of Hope brought an involuntary tightening to Virgil's chest. Though he had successfully avoided another encounter with her since their meeting in town, her presence lingered in his thoughts more often than he cared to admit. Each time Timmy took the herbal medicine she had provided, alongside Doc Henderson's prescription, Virgil found himself recalling the gentle way she had knelt to the boy's level, the confident assessment of his symptoms, the genuine concern in her expression. I'm sure she's very capable, he replied neutrally, turning away from the window. I should check the north pasture fence before dark. The evening before the first day of school found Virgil sitting on the porch steps, watching as Emma meticulously packed and repacked her small satchel with the slate and primers they had purchased in town. Her face was a study in concentration, the responsibility of school clearly weighty in her young mind. What if I don't know the answers? She asked suddenly, looking up at Virgil with uncharacteristic vulnerability. What if the town children are smarter than me? Virgil moved to sit beside her on the step. Emma, you're one of the brightest children I've ever known, and it's not about being smarter than others, it's about doing your best with the gifts God gave you. She considered this, absently tracing the edge of her slate with one finger. Will you come inside the schoolhouse with us tomorrow, just to make sure it's all right? The request touched something deep in Virgil's heart. Despite her outward confidence, Emma was still a child who had lost her parents and faced an uncertain future. School represented another change, another potential loss of security. Of course I will, he promised, surprising himself with how easily the commitment came. I'll take you all in and make sure you're settled before I leave. Emma's smile was worth any discomfort the prospect of facing Hope Caldwell again might bring. Thank you, Mr. Virgil. The first day of school dawned clear and cool, with just enough crispness in the air to hint at the autumn to come. The children were awake and dressed before sunrise, too excited or nervous to sleep. By the time Virgil had hitched the wagon and loaded everyone aboard, even stoic Samuel was fidgeting with anticipation. The schoolhouse sat on the eastern edge of town, a simple white clapboard building with a small bell tower. As they approached, Virgil could see other wagons and several children on horseback arriving, the yard already alive with activity. Hope Caldwell stood at the door, greeting each child with a warm smile and a few personal words, her dark green dress setting off the rich brown of her hair, which was again arranged in a neat bun. Virgil felt an unexpected flutter of nerves as he helped the children down from the wagon. He told himself it was merely concern for their well-being in this new environment, but some more honest part of him recognized it as something else entirely. Good morning, Xavier children, Hope called as they approached, her smile widening. I'm so pleased you've joined us. Emma stepped forward first, extending her hand with grave formality. Good morning, Miss Caldwell. Thank you for accepting us into your school. Hope shook the offered hand with equal seriousness, though her eyes sparkled with amusement. The pleasure is mine, Emma. I've prepared a special place for each of you. She greeted each child by name, even kneeling to welcome shy Rose with particular gentleness before turning her attention to Virgil. Mr. Xavier, would you like to come inside and see where the children will be sitting? Though he had planned to simply drop them off with a brief greeting, Virgil found himself nodding. If it's not an imposition. Not at all, Hope assured him, leading the way into the schoolhouse. The interior was bright and welcoming, with rows of desks arranged by age and ability. Colorful maps adorned the walls, alongside a large slate board and carefully lettered alphabet cards. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars. Emma, you'll be here with the older students, Hope explained, indicating a desk in the third row. Samuel, you're just behind her. Rose and Timmy, you'll be in the second row where I can easily help with your reading. The children moved to their assigned places with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, immediately examining their desks and comparing them with neighboring students who were also arriving and finding their seats. You've created a lovely learning environment, Virgil observed, genuinely impressed by the thoughtful arrangement of the room. Thank you, Hope replied, a faint blush coloring her cheeks at the compliment. I believe children learn best when they feel secure and inspired. I've tried to create a space that offers both. There was something in her expression as she looked around the schoolroom, a pride mingled with purpose that resonated with Virgil's own feelings about his ranch. They were both building something meaningful in this frontier town, contributing to its future in their own ways. "How is Timmy's cough?" Hope asked, her gaze shifting to where the boy was already engaged in animated conversation with a tow-headed child at the neighboring desk. "Much improved thanks to your herbal remedy and Doc Henderson's medicine," Virgil replied. "He's been eager to attend school despite his lingering symptoms." Hope nodded, pleased. "I'm glad to hear it. Children are remarkably resilient, aren't they, both physically and emotionally?" "More so than adults sometimes," Virgil agreed, thinking of how quickly the orphaned children had adapted to their new circumstances while he still struggled with the changes to his carefully ordered life. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken by the arrival of more students and parents. Hope greeted each with the same warm attention she had shown the Xavier children, demonstrating a remarkable ability to make each child feel individually welcomed. "I should let you continue your greetings," Virgil said finally, reluctant to leave yet aware of his responsibilities waiting at the ranch. "The children have their lunches and I'll return at 3 o'clock to collect them." "They'll be well cared for," Hope assured him, somehow understanding his unspoken concern. "And I believe they'll thrive here." As Virgil turned to leave, Emma rushed over for one final hug, an unprecedented display of affection that caught him off guard. "Thank you for bringing us, Mr. Virgil," she whispered before returning to her desk with newfound confidence. The unexpected embrace left Virgil momentarily speechless, and when he glanced at Hope, he found her watching the interaction with a soft expression that suggested both understanding and something more complex he couldn't quite name. "Until this afternoon, Miss Caldwell," he managed, tipping his hat before striding out into the schoolyard, unsettled by the emotions swirling within him. The day passed slowly at the ranch without the children's presence. Virgil found himself listening for their voices as he mended tack in the barn or checking the time more frequently than usual as he rode the property. Even Michael, whom Mrs. Tanner was watching, seemed subdued without his siblings, napping longer than usual and playing quietly with his wooden blocks. When it was finally time to collect the children, Virgil arrived at the schoolhouse early, sitting in his wagon and watching as other parents gathered. The bell rang precisely at 3 o'clock, and moments later the door burst open, releasing a flood of energetic children into the yard. The Xavier children emerged in a tight group, their faces alight with excitement as they spotted him waiting. They raced to the wagon, all talking at once in their eagerness to share the day's experiences. "Miss Caldwell says I read better than any third grader she's ever taught," Emma announced proudly. "I got to help clean the blackboard," Rose added, clearly considering this a high honor. "There's a boy named William who has a pet raccoon," Samuel reported, and Miss Caldwell let him tell us all about how he trained it. "And I didn't cough hardly at all," Timmy concluded, climbing into the wagon with unusual energy. "Miss Caldwell gave me more of that licorice tea at lunchtime." Virgil helped them all aboard, oddly touched by their enthusiasm. "It sounds like you all had a good first day." "The best day," Rose declared solemnly. "Miss Caldwell says I can be anything I want when I grow up, even a doctor like her father was." This detail about Hope's background caught Virgil's attention. Her father was a doctor. Emma nodded importantly, "in Chicago. She told us during lunch that he taught her about medicine when she was just a little girl, but then he died in the war, so she had to learn more at a hospital." Before Virgil could process this information, Hope appeared at the schoolhouse door, waving to departing students and their families. When she spotted the Xavier wagon, she made her way across the yard, a leather-bound book in her hands. "Mr. Xavier," she called as she approached, "I thought you might want to see the reader I've assigned to Emma. It's more advanced than what the other third years are using, but I believe she's ready for the challenge." She handed him the book, Intermediate Literature for Young Scholars, with evident pride in his ward's abilities. She has a remarkable vocabulary for a child her age, and her comprehension is exceptional. Virgil turned the book in his hands, unexpectedly moved by this tangible evidence of Emma's intelligence and Hope's recognition of it. "Thank you for noticing her abilities," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "All of their abilities," he added, including the other children with a glance. Hope's smile was understanding. "They're wonderful children, Mr. Xavier. You've clearly provided them with a nurturing environment despite the challenges." The genuine admiration in her voice caught Virgil off guard. He was accustomed to pity or patronizing approval from townspeople regarding his unusual household, but Hope's assessment felt different, a professional recognition of what the children had accomplished rather than amazement that a bachelor rancher hadn't completely failed at raising orphans. "They deserve every chance," he said simply, handing the book to an eager Emma. "As do you," Hope replied softly, then seemed surprised by her own words. "I mean, raising 5 children while running a ranch must leave little time for yourself." Virgil shrugged, uncomfortable with her perception. "It's temporary," he said automatically, then winced as he saw Emma's expression fall slightly at the familiar refrain. Hope's gaze moved between him and the children, noting the reaction with perceptive eyes. "Well, temporary or permanent, you're all welcome at our school community," she said diplomatically. "In fact, we'll be having a harvest social next month to raise funds for new books. I hope you'll all attend." "Can we, Mr. Virgil?" Rose asked immediately, eyes wide with anticipation. "Please." Put on the spot, Virgil found himself nodding. "We'll see how ranch work goes. If we're caught up on preparations for winter, perhaps we can attend." This qualified response was enough to restore the children's good spirits as they settled into the wagon. Hope stepped back, raising a hand in farewell. "Until tomorrow, children, Mr. Xavier, it was good to see you again." As they drove away, Virgil found himself replaying their brief conversation, particularly Hope's comment about him deserving chances too. It had been a long time since anyone had considered his needs or wants separate from his responsibilities. The observation was both unsettling and oddly warming. "Miss Caldwell asked if you were coming to the social," Emma informed him as they turned onto the road toward home. "When you were helping Rose into the wagon." Virgil kept his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. "Did she now?" She said it would be nice to see the whole Xavier family there." "Family?" The word hung in the air between them, loaded with implications Virgil wasn't prepared to address. "Miss Caldwell was just being polite," he said finally. But as they continued toward the ranch, the setting sun painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber, Virgil couldn't help wondering if the schoolteacher's interest might be more than mere politeness, and why the possibility stirred such a complicated response within him. The following weeks established a new rhythm to life at the Xavier Ranch. Mornings began earlier now, with breakfast prepared and children dressed in time to make the 5-mile journey to school. Afternoons saw Virgil waiting at the schoolhouse at 3 o'clock, listening to excited recountings of the day's lessons on the ride home. Evenings were filled with homework supervision and preparations for the next day. Through it all, Virgil maintained a cordial but distant relationship with Hope Caldwell, exchanging brief greetings during drop-offs and pickups, but careful never to linger or engage in extended conversation. If she noticed his deliberate restraint, she respected it, limiting their interactions to necessary discussions about the children's education. Despite his efforts to maintain emotional distance, however, Virgil found himself increasingly curious about the schoolteacher. Bits of information gleaned from the children's casual remarks painted a portrait of a woman with both backbone and compassion, qualities Virgil had learned were essential for survival in the West. "Miss Caldwell stood up to Mr. Henderson when he said girls shouldn't learn science," Emma reported one evening as she practiced her sums at the kitchen table. "She told him that her father taught her all about anatomy and chemistry, and that women make excellent doctors because they notice details men miss." "Is that so?" Virgil replied, trying to sound merely polite rather than intrigued. Samuel nodded, looking up from his geography lesson. "And when Billy Matthews said his pa doesn't hold with educated women, Miss Caldwell just smiled and said his pa was entitled to his opinion, but in her classroom everyone learns everything." The harvest social approached with the first hints of autumn coloring the landscape. Though Virgil had made no definite commitment to attend, the children spoke of little else, and he found himself reluctantly considering the possibility as the date drew nearer. Mrs. Tanner says she'll watch Michael if he's too little for the dancing, Rose informed him as they rode to school one crisp October morning, and we can wear our Sunday clothes. Virgil sighed, recognizing the inevitability of his defeat. I suppose we could make an appearance, he conceded, earning cheers from all four children, but only for an hour or two. The north pasture fence still needs work before the first snow. The night of the social arrived with perfect autumn weather, cool enough for jackets but not so cold as to discourage attendance. Virgil stood before the small mirror in his bedroom, adjusting the collar of his rarely worn dress shirt and wondering how he had allowed himself to be maneuvered into this situation. The children were ready well before necessary, assembled in the main room in their best clothes, practically vibrating with excitement. Even Michael, who would be staying with Mrs. Tanner, had insisted on wearing his church shoes to see his siblings off to the social. You look very handsome, Mr. Virgil, Emma declared when he emerged from his room, her tone so matter-of-fact that he couldn't help smiling. And you all look very grown up, he replied, genuinely impressed by the transformation. With clean faces, combed hair, and their best clothes, the children bore little resemblance to the dusty, energetic beings who typically ran wild around the ranch. The schoolhouse had been transformed for the occasion. Paper lanterns hung from the eaves, casting a warm glow over the yard where tables had been arranged with refreshments. Inside, the desks had been pushed against the walls to create a space for dancing, and a small group of local musicians was setting up in one corner. As they approached, Virgil could see that most of the town had turned out for the event. Farmers, ranchers, shopkeepers, and their families mingled in the schoolyard, the usual social divisions temporarily suspended in the spirit of community celebration. Hope Caldwell stood near the entrance, greeting arrivals. She wore a dress of deep blue that complemented her complexion, her hair arranged more elaborately than her usual teaching style, with soft tendrils framing her face. The sight of her caused an unexpected tightness in Virgil's chest, a reaction he firmly attributed to the general awkwardness of social occasions rather than any personal response to the schoolteacher. "Xavier, children," Hope exclaimed as they approached, her face lighting with genuine pleasure. "How wonderful that you could join us." Her gaze shifted to Virgil, a warmth in her expression that suggested she was equally pleased by his presence. "And Mr. Xavier, thank you for bringing them." Before he could formulate a suitably neutral response, the children scattered, Emma and Rose drawn to a group of girls comparing ribbons, Samuel and Timmy heading straight for the refreshment table where Mrs. Peterson was serving cider and cookies. "They've been looking forward to this all week," Virgil said, suddenly aware of being alone with Hope. "I believe they would have mutinied if I'd suggested staying home." Hope laughed, the sound unexpectedly musical. "Children have a way of rearranging our priorities, don't they? Even temporarily," she added with gentle irony, referencing his oft-repeated assertion about the arrangement. Virgil found himself smiling despite his discomfort. "They're certainly persistent in getting their way." "A useful trait on the frontier," Hope observed, watching as Timmy successfully negotiated for an extra cookie from an indulgent Mrs. Peterson. "Determination often makes the difference between success and failure out here." "Speaking from experience?" Virgil asked, genuinely curious about what had brought a clearly educated woman to this remote corner of Montana Territory. Hope's expression grew more thoughtful. "In a way, though I suspect my challenges pale in comparison to raising 5 children while managing a ranch." Before Virgil could press further, Sheriff Miller approached, his wife on his arm. "Xavier. Didn't expect to see you at a social gathering. Miss Caldwell must be working miracles with those children to get you out of your hermit's cave." The sheriff's good-natured ribbing drew a polite laugh from Hope, but Virgil noticed a slight stiffening in her posture, as though she disapproved of the characterization. "The children were eager to attend," Virgil replied evenly, "and Miss Caldwell has been an excellent teacher. They've progressed remarkably under her guidance." The genuine compliment brought a flush to Hope's cheeks, visible even in the lantern light. "They're naturally bright children, Sheriff. I merely provide direction for their curiosity." Mrs. Miller, a practical woman with a kind face, nudged her husband. Thomas, I believe they're starting the Virginia reel. Shall we? As the sheriff and his wife moved toward the schoolhouse, where music had indeed begun, Hope turned back to Virgil. You should be proud of those children, Mr. Xavier. They're thriving despite their difficult circumstances. The credit belongs to their resilience, not to me, Virgil demurred, uncomfortable with praise for what he still viewed as a temporary responsibility rather than a permanent commitment. Hope studied him for a moment, her expression suggesting she saw more than he intended to reveal. Perhaps, but children are remarkably perceptive. They respond to genuine care even when it comes with reservations. The insight was uncomfortably accurate, and Virgil found himself searching for a response that neither confirmed nor denied her assessment. Before he could formulate one, Emma came running up, her face flushed with excitement. Miss Caldwell, they're going to start the children's dance. Will you come show us the steps? Hope smiled, her attention immediately shifting to the child. Of course, Emma. Mr. Xavier, would you care to join us? We need adult partners for demonstration. Put on the spot and unable to refuse without disappointing all four children, who had now gathered with expectant faces, Virgil found himself nodding reluctantly. I should warn you that I'm not much of a dancer. Fortunately, the children's reel is quite simple, Hope assured him with a smile that suggested she understood his discomfort but appreciated his willingness to participate despite it. Just follow my lead. The next hour passed in a blur of music, laughter, and movement, as Hope patiently taught the children the basic steps of several simple dances. Virgil found himself reluctantly drawn into the festivities, first as a demonstration partner for Hope and then dancing with each of the girls while Hope partnered with the boys. To his surprise, he discovered he was enjoying himself. There was something infectious about the children's enthusiasm and Hope's graceful guidance. She moved with natural rhythm, her skirts swirling as she demonstrated turns and steps, her laugh ringing out when someone made a misstep. You're a better dancer than you claimed, Mr. Xavier, she remarked during a brief pause while the musicians readied for the next set. Quite light on your feet for a rancher. My mother insisted on teaching me the basics, Virgil admitted, the memory both sweet and painful. She believed that civilization required certain social graces, even on the frontier. Hope's expression softened. She sounds like a wise woman. She was, Virgil agreed quietly. It was the first personal detail he had volunteered, and the significance wasn't lost on either of them. The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Peterson announcing that refreshments were being served in the schoolyard. The children immediately clamored to get cookies and cider, and Virgil found himself following them outside, Hope walking beside him. The evening air had grown cooler, and Virgil noticed Hope shiver slightly as they stepped into the yard. Without thinking, he removed his jacket and placed it around her shoulders, the gesture automatic and surprising to them both. Thank you, she said softly, pulling the jacket closer. It enveloped her slender form, still warm from his body. That's very kind. Can't have our teacher catching cold, Virgil replied, immediately retreating to practicality. The children would be devastated to miss school. A small smile played at the corners of Hope's mouth. Of course, purely practical considerations. As the children occupied themselves with refreshments and games organized by the older students, Virgil and Hope found themselves standing slightly apart from the main gathering, watching the community celebration unfold around them. May I ask you something, Mr. Xavier? Hope said after a comfortable silence had settled between them. Virgil nodded, curious about what she might want to know. Why do you insist that your arrangement with the children is temporary? They clearly adore you, and you've created a stable home for them, something rare for orphans in these parts. The directness of the question caught him off guard. Most people accepted his standard explanation without challenge, but Hope Caldwell apparently wasn't most people. The frontier is no place for attachments, he said finally, voicing the belief that had guided him since his parents' deaths. Caring too deeply only makes the inevitable losses harder to bear. Hope considered this, her gaze thoughtful as she watched the children playing. Is that what you truly believe, or is it what you've told yourself to avoid risk? The question struck uncomfortably close to truths Virgil rarely examined. It's what experience has taught me, he replied, more defensively than intended. I've seen what happens when people build dreams on shifting sands. Hope turned to face him fully, her expression earnest in the lantern light. With respect, Mr. Xavier, love isn't a structure that can be toppled by circumstance. It's more like a seed. Once planted, it can grow even in the harshest conditions, often becoming stronger for having endured difficulty. A poetic notion, Virgil acknowledged, but practical considerations remain. I'm a single man running a growing ranch. Those children deserve a proper family, a mother and father who can give them the attention and guidance they need. And if no such family materializes, would you truly send them away to an orphanage or separate them to different households when they've already found stability with you? The question hung between them, exposing the contradiction Virgil had avoided confronting. Each passing month made the prospect of sending the children away more unthinkable, yet he clung to the fiction of temporariness as a shield against the vulnerability of commitment. Before he could formulate a response, a commotion near the refreshment table drew their attention. Timmy was coughing violently, bent double as Mrs. Peterson patted his back in alarm. Virgil was moving instantly, Hope right beside him. They reached Timmy as the worst of the coughing subsided, leaving the boy pale and shaken. "What happened?" Virgil demanded, kneeling to examine the child. "He was running and then just started coughing," Samuel explained, hovering anxiously nearby. "He couldn't stop." Hope pressed a gentle hand to Timmy's forehead. "He's warm again. The excitement may have been too much with his lingering bronchitis." Timmy looked up at Virgil with tear-filled eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Virgil. I don't want to ruin the party." "You haven't ruined anything," Virgil assured him, scooping the small body into his arms, "but I think we should get you home to rest." "I have more of that herbal remedy at my boarding house," Hope offered. "It's on your way out of town. If you don't mind stopping, I could prepare some for him to take tonight." Virgil hesitated only briefly before nodding. That would be appreciated. As word spread that the Xavier family was departing early, the other children gathered around, their disappointment evident but secondary to concern for their brother. "Can I stay?" Emma asked hopefully. "Mrs. Miller said I could ride home with them since they pass right by our ranch." The request presented a dilemma. Virgil was reluctant to spoil all the children's evening, yet equally hesitant to entrust Emma to others' care, despite the Millers' reliability. Hope seemed to sense his conflict. "Perhaps all the children could stay and enjoy the remainder of the social while you take Timmy home," she suggested. "I could accompany you to prepare the medicine and then return to supervise them. The Millers would ensure everyone gets home safely." The offer was generous and solved the immediate problem, yet Virgil found himself strangely reluctant to be alone with Hope Caldwell, even briefly. Their conversation had already veered into territory that made him uncomfortable. More private interaction might lead further down that path. Yet Timmy's needs came first, and the other children's disappointment was palpable. "If you're certain it's not an imposition," he said finally. "Not at all," Hope assured him, already removing his jacket from her shoulders and handing it back. "Let me just speak with Mrs. Miller and gather my things." 10 minutes later, they were in the wagon, Timmy bundled in blankets beside Virgil, while Hope directed them to Mrs. Whittaker's boarding house on the eastern edge of town. The modest two-story building was dark except for a lamp burning in the front parlor. "I won't be but a moment," Hope promised as Virgil helped her down from the wagon. "Mrs. Whittaker retires early, but she gave me a key to come and go as I please." True to her word, Hope returned quickly with a small packet similar to the one she had provided previously. "The preparation is the same, steeped for 5 minutes in hot water 3 times daily. It should help ease the congestion and reduce his fever." "Thank you," Virgil said, genuinely grateful for her assistance. "I can take you back to the social now." Hope glanced at Timmy, who was dozing fitfully against Virgil's shoulder. "Actually, I think I should examine him more thoroughly first. His symptoms seem to be returning rather than resolving completely. Would you mind bringing him inside briefly? My medical bag is in my room." Though reluctant to impose further, Virgil was concerned enough about Timmy's condition to agree. He carried the drowsy child up the porch steps, following Hope into the quiet boarding house. The front parlor was modestly furnished but scrupulously clean. Hope led them to a small sitting area near the unlit fireplace. "Please make yourselves comfortable, I'll just be a moment." While she disappeared upstairs, Virgil settled Timmy on a settee, noting how the normally energetic boy seemed content to lie quietly, his breathing slightly labored. Hope returned carrying a black leather bag similar to Doc Henderson's, though smaller. She knelt beside the settee, her manner shifting subtly from schoolteacher to medical professional. "Timmy, I need to listen to your chest." "Is that all right?" she asked gently. The boy nodded, watching with curious eyes as she removed a stethoscope from her bag. With practiced movements, Hope placed the instrument against Timmy's chest, moving it systematically while listening intently. She then felt along the sides of his throat and looked into his mouth and ears with a small instrument. "His lungs are still congested," she reported to Virgil, who stood watching the examination with poorly concealed anxiety. "And there's some inflammation in his throat. The herbal remedy will help, but he needs complete rest for at least 2 days. No school, no chores, and plenty of fluids." Virgil nodded, absorbing the instructions. "Should I take him to Doc Henderson tomorrow?" Hope considered this, packing her instruments back into the bag. If his fever increases or the coughing worsens, yes. Otherwise, rest and the medication should be sufficient. As she closed her bag, a small framed photograph that had been tucked inside became visible. Though partially obscured, Virgil could make out what appeared to be a family portrait. A distinguished-looking man in a formal coat, a woman seated beside him, and a young girl who bore a striking resemblance to Hope standing between them. Hope noticed his gaze and hesitated before removing the photograph and handing it to him. "My parents," she explained softly. "This was taken in 1864, shortly before my father left to serve as a surgeon with the Union forces. He died at Petersburg the following year." The simple statement contained volumes of unspoken pain. Virgil studied the image, recognizing the same intelligent eyes and determined expression that characterized the woman before him now. "You look like him," he observed. "Yes," Hope agreed with a sad smile. "He was a brilliant physician and a kind man. He believed in educating women equally to men, quite progressive for his time. My mother never recovered from his loss. She passed 3 years ago from pneumonia." The parallel to his own history of loss was not lost on Virgil. "I'm sorry," he said, returning the photograph with gentle hands. "Losing both parents leaves a particular kind of emptiness." Hope's gaze met his, recognition flaring at his personal understanding of her grief. "Yes, it does. Is that what happened to you as well?" Virgil nodded, surprised to find himself willing to share this part of his past. "My mother fell ill when I was 16. Without proper medical care out here, she didn't stand a chance. My father lost his will to continue afterward. By 17, I was alone." "Yet here you are," Hope said softly, "building something meaningful despite that loss." "Surviving," Virgil corrected, though without his usual conviction. Hope studied him for a moment before carefully replacing the photograph in her bag. "There's a difference between surviving and living, Mr. Xavier. I believe you've been doing the former while convincing yourself it's enough." The observation cut closer to the bone than Virgil was comfortable acknowledging. He glanced at Timmy, who had drifted into sleep during their quiet conversation. "We should get him home." Hope nodded, recognizing his retreat. "Of course. Let me prepare the medicine to take with you, and then you can drop me back at the social." As she moved to the small kitchen attached to the parlor, Virgil remained beside the sleeping child, pondering her words. Was there truth in her assessment? Had he been merely existing rather than fully engaging with life? The arrival of the children had certainly disrupted his carefully constructed isolation, forcing him to interact with the community and consider needs beyond his own. And now Hope Caldwell had entered their lives, challenging his assumptions with her quiet wisdom and unexpected understanding. She represented precisely the kind of entanglement he had always avoided, a woman who saw too clearly, who asked questions that required honest examination of his long-held beliefs. "Here you are," Hope said, returning with a larger packet of the herbal mixture. "This should last several days. Remember, steep for 5 minutes in hot water." "Thank you," Virgil said, lifting Timmy gently. "For everything." Hope held the door as he carried the boy out to the wagon, then climbed up beside him for the short journey back to the schoolhouse. The social was still in full swing, music and laughter spilling into the night as they approached. "I'll ensure the children have a wonderful time and return safely," Hope promised as Virgil helped her down from the wagon. "And please don't hesitate to send word if Timmy's condition worsens." "I will," Virgil assured her, suddenly reluctant to part ways despite his earlier discomfort. "Hope," he began, then paused, surprised to find himself using her given name. She looked up at him expectantly, her face illuminated by the distant lanterns from the schoolyard. "Thank you for understanding about the children," he finished awkwardly, "about why I've always said it's temporary." Hope's expression softened. "I understand the fear behind the claim, Virgil. But I also see the love that contradicts it every time you look at them." She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Safe journey home, take care of that boy." As Virgil drove away, Timmy's small form pressed trustingly against his side. He found himself replaying Hope's words. The love that contradicts it. Was it possible that his actions had already betrayed his stated intentions? That despite his insistence on emotional distance, he had already formed attachments that would be painful to sever. The thought was both terrifying and strangely liberating. Perhaps his careful avoidance of commitment had become its own prison, limiting not just his capacity for pain but also for joy. The children had brought chaos into his ordered existence, certainly, but also laughter, purpose, and a peculiar kind of fulfillment he hadn't known he was missing. And Hope Caldwell, with her perceptive gaze and gentle challenges, had somehow seen through the barriers he had constructed so carefully. The realization was unsettling, yet as he drove through the moonlit landscape toward home, Virgil found himself wondering what other truths she might help him discover if he found the courage to let her try. Timmy's illness proved more persistent than anticipated. Despite Hope's herbal remedy and careful nursing, his fever spiked dangerously the following evening, prompting Virgil to make a midnight ride for Doc Henderson. The diagnosis was pneumonia, a development that struck fear into Virgil's heart, given his mother's fate from the same disease. For 3 days, Virgil barely left Timmy's bedside, watching anxiously as the small chest labored for each breath. The other children moved through the house in uncharacteristic silence, their faces solemn with worry. Even Michael seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, foregoing his usual boisterous play. On the 3rd day, a knock at the door revealed Hope Caldwell, her arms laden with books and papers. "I've brought the children's lessons," she explained, stepping inside at Virgil's invitation, "and I wanted to see how Timmy is faring." The genuine concern in her expression touched something deep in Virgil's heart. "He's holding his own," he replied, leading her to the bedroom where Timmy lay sleeping fitfully. "Doc Henderson says the fever should break soon if the medication does its work." Hope approached the bed quietly, her practiced eye assessing the child's condition. "His color is better than I expected," she observed, placing a gentle hand on Timmy's forehead, "and the fever seems less intense." "It was higher this morning," Virgil said, the exhaustion of constant vigilance evident in his voice. Hope turned to study him, noting the dark circles beneath his eyes and the stubble that had grown beyond its usual neat state. "When did you last sleep properly?" Virgil shrugged dismissively. "I've managed a few hours here and there." "You won't help Timmy by making yourself ill," Hope chided gently. "Why don't you rest while I sit with him? I've canceled school for the day due to several cases of illness in town." The offer was tempting, especially as fatigue dragged at Virgil's limbs and clouded his thinking. Yet surrendering responsibility for Timmy's care, even briefly, felt like an admission of weakness he wasn't prepared to make. "That's kind, but unnecessary," he began, only to be cut off by Emma's appearance in the doorway. "Please let Miss Caldwell help, Mr. Virgil," the girl pleaded, her young face serious beyond her years. "Samuel and I can manage the chores and Rose is watching Michael, but you need to sleep." The concern in Emma's eyes, so adult, so reminiscent of the worry he had seen in his own mother's face when his father worked himself to exhaustion, was the final argument Virgil couldn't counter. "Perhaps for a few hours," he conceded reluctantly. Hope's smile was warm with approval. "Good, I'll wake you immediately if there's any change in his condition." Despite his intention to merely rest briefly, Virgil fell into a deep sleep almost the moment he stretched out on his bed. When he woke, the quality of light suggested late afternoon, meaning he had slept for several hours. Alarmed at having been unconscious so long, he rose quickly and moved to Timmy's room. The sight that greeted him stopped him in the doorway. Hope sat in the chair beside Timmy's bed, reading aloud from what appeared to be an adventure novel. The boy was awake, his eyes bright with interest rather than fever as he listened to the story. A tray on the bedside table held the remains of what looked like soup and tea. "Mr. Virgil," Timmy exclaimed, noticing him first, "Miss Caldwell is reading about pirates. And she made soup that didn't taste like medicine." Hope looked up, a pleased smile lighting her features. "His fever broke about an hour ago. I hope you don't mind that I took the liberty of preparing some broth, Mrs. Tanner showed me where everything was kept in the kitchen." "Mind," Virgil repeated incredulously. "How could I mind when you've clearly worked miracles?" The relief that flooded through him was so intense it was almost painful. Only now, seeing Timmy alert and improving, did Virgil realize how desperately afraid he had been, not just of losing the child, but of facing that loss alone, as he had faced so many others. "The credit belongs to Doc Henderson's medication and Timmy's strong constitution," Hope demurred, rising from the chair, "and to your excellent care these past days." Virgil moved to Timmy's bedside, resting a hand on the boy's forehead to confirm the absence of fever for himself. "How do you feel, son?" The endearment slipped out unconsciously, but neither Virgil nor Timmy seemed to notice its significance. "Much better," the boy replied. "Miss Caldwell says I can have pudding for dinner if I drink all my water." "A fair bargain," Virgil agreed, his voice rough with emotion. He turned to Hope, struggling to find words adequate to express his gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you." "Seeing him improved is thanks enough," she replied simply. "I lost too many patients during the war and at the hospital afterward. Each recovery feels like a personal victory." There was something in her expression, a shadow of old grief, that suggested her medical experience had left deeper marks than she typically revealed. Virgil was struck again by the layers to this woman, the complexity beneath her composed exterior. "Still, I'm in your debt," he insisted. "You've gone far beyond your duties as a teacher." Hope's smile held a hint of amusement. "Perhaps I simply enjoy the company here. Your home is quite pleasant, Virgil, warm in ways that have nothing to do with the fire in the hearth." The observation caught him off guard, as did her casual use of his given name. Before he could respond, Samuel appeared in the doorway, looking anxious. "Mr. Virgil, there's a rider coming fast, looks like Sheriff Miller." Virgil moved quickly to the front door, concerned about what might bring the sheriff to his ranch in such apparent haste. Hope followed, her expression similarly worried. Sheriff Miller reined his horse to a stop in the yard, his face grim as he dismounted. "Xavier," he acknowledged with a nod. "Miss Caldwell. Didn't expect to find you out here." "What brings you, Sheriff?" Virgil asked, getting directly to the point. Miller removed his hat, running a hand through graying hair. "Bad news, I'm afraid. The road agents that attacked the stage last month, turns out they were part of a larger gang. Their friends have been causing trouble up north and now they've moved into our territory." "What kind of trouble?" Hope asked, her voice steady despite the concern in her eyes. "Robberies mostly, but they're not shy about violence," Miller replied. "They hit the Wellington ranch yesterday, took cash, valuables, and shot Wellington when he resisted. He'll live, but it was a close thing." Virgil felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The Wellington place was less than 20 miles north, uncomfortably close. "You're warning outlying ranches." Miller nodded grimly. "Advising everyone to be on guard, travel in groups, keep valuables hidden, and be prepared to defend yourselves if necessary. I've wired for federal marshals, but it could be weeks before they arrive." "How many in the gang?" Virgil asked, his mind already calculating the ranch's vulnerabilities and how best to protect the children. "Reports suggest 6 to 8 men," the sheriff replied. "Well-armed and desperate. Their leader is a man called Blackburn, nasty piece of work with a reputation for holding grudges. He was kin to one of the men we shot during the posse." The news cast a pall over the gathering. Virgil was acutely aware of Emma and Samuel listening from the doorway, their young faces solemn with understanding beyond their years. "I appreciate the warning, Sheriff," Virgil said, his voice deliberately calm for the children's benefit. "We'll take precautions." Miller nodded, replacing his hat. "See that you do. And Miss Caldwell, you shouldn't be traveling alone right now. I'd be happy to escort you back to town when you're ready." Hope hesitated, glancing toward the house where Timmy was recovering. "Actually, Sheriff, I was planning to stay overnight to help with Timmy. He's just turned the corner with his illness." The offer surprised Virgil, though he couldn't deny feeling relief at the prospect of her continued presence, both for Timmy's sake and for the additional adult support with trouble potentially brewing. Sheriff Miller frowned, clearly concerned about Hope's safety. "That's mighty generous, but I'm not sure it's wise. These are dangerous men, Miss Caldwell." "All the more reason not to leave Mr. Xavier alone with 5 children and an invalid," Hope replied firmly. "I'm staying, Sheriff, but thank you for your concern." The sheriff looked to Virgil, who found himself nodding in agreement. "We'd be grateful for Miss Caldwell's help if she's certain." "Well, I can't force you back to town," Miller conceded, "but Xavier, you keep that rifle of yours loaded. And I'll send a deputy to check on you all tomorrow." After the sheriff departed, a tense silence fell over the ranch house. The children had retreated inside, but their subdued whispers suggested they understood enough of the situation to be frightened. "I hope I didn't overstep," Hope said quietly as she and Virgil stood on the porch, watching the sheriff disappear down the road. "But I couldn't bear the thought of leaving you all alone with Timmy still recovering and this new threat looming." Virgil's gaze met hers, finding surprising steadiness there despite the danger. "Thank you," he said simply. "Your presence is welcome." The word seemed inadequate for the profound relief he felt knowing he wouldn't face this latest challenge alone. It wasn't just the practical help with Timmy or the additional adult supervision for the children, though those were significant, but something more fundamental. The comfort of shared burden of not being the sole protector and decision-maker in a moment of potential crisis. "We should prepare the children," Hope suggested, practical as always. "Not to frighten them unnecessarily, but they should understand the importance of staying close to the house and being vigilant." Virgil nodded in agreement. "And I need to check our defenses, make sure everything is secure." As twilight descended over the ranch, Virgil moved methodically through his preparations. Checking locks on doors and windows, cleaning and loading his rifle and revolver, and positioning lanterns strategically around the property to eliminate shadows where intruders might hide. Hope, meanwhile, gathered the children in the main room, explaining the situation in terms that were honest but not terrifying. She established clear rules about staying within sight of the house and coming immediately if called, then distracted them with a game that had them laughing despite the underlying tension. By the time full darkness fell, the ranch was as secure as Virgil could make it, and the younger children were ready for bed. As Hope supervised their nighttime routine, Virgil took Samuel aside for a more adult conversation. "I'm counting on you to help keep everyone safe," he told the boy solemnly. "If anything happens, anything at all, I need you to get the little ones to the root cellar and stay there until either Miss Caldwell or I come for you." Samuel nodded, his young face serious beneath sandy hair. "I can do that, Mr. Virgil. I'll protect them." The responsibility seemed to straighten the boy's shoulders, giving him a maturity beyond his 8 years. Virgil felt a surge of pride mixed with regret that such burdens should fall on one so young. "I know you will, son," he said, resting a hand briefly on Samuel's shoulder before sending him to join the others for bedtime. With the children finally settled, Virgil returned to the main room to find Hope stoking the fire, her face thoughtful in the dancing light. "They're resilient," she observed as he joined her, frightened but trusting that the adults in their lives will protect them. Virgil sighed, the weight of that trust settling heavily on his shoulders. "I've tried to keep them safe from everything, illness, accident, the everyday dangers of ranch life, but this, deliberate human malice, is something else entirely." Hope studied him across the fire's glow. "You can't shield them from all of life's harshness, Virgil. None of us can protect those we love completely." The simple statement contained profound truth that resonated with his own experience. His parents, for all their love and good intentions, had been unable to protect him from becoming an orphan in a harsh land. And now he faced the same limitations with these children who had come to depend on him. "I know," he admitted quietly, "but that doesn't stop me from trying." Hope's smile was gentle with understanding. "That's what makes you a good father to them, temporary or not." The observation hung between them, challenging his long-maintained fiction that his role in the children's lives was merely provisional. Before he could formulate a response, Hope rose from her chair. "I should check on Timmy once more before we rest," she said. "Will you be keeping watch tonight?" Virgil nodded, grateful for the change of subject. "I'll take the first shift. You should get some sleep. The small bedroom off the kitchen has a spare bed you can use." "Wake me in 4 hours," Hope instructed. "You need rest too, especially after these past days with Timmy's illness." After she had gone to check on the sick child, Virgil settled into a chair with a clear view of both the front door and the main window, his rifle across his lap. The night stretched before him, quiet except for the occasional crackle of the fire and the familiar sounds of the ranch settling. His thoughts, however, were anything but quiet. Hope's presence had catalyzed a growing recognition that his careful emotional distance from the children was increasingly a pretense rather than a reality. The terror he had felt at Timmy's illness, the pride in Samuel's responsibility, the joy in Emma's academic achievements, these were not the detached concerns of a temporary guardian but the deep investment of a parent. And now, with danger threatening, he found himself grateful beyond words for Hope Caldwell's steady presence and practical support. It was a novel experience for a man who had prided himself on self-sufficiency for so long. The night passed without incident, Hope relieving him at the agreed hour despite his protests that she should sleep longer. The following day brought renewed vigilance but also a return to necessary routines. Timmy continued to improve, sitting up to eat breakfast and asking to join the others for lessons that Hope improvised at the kitchen table. By mid-afternoon, the promised deputy arrived to check on them, bringing news that the outlaws had been spotted near the Morris place 15 miles west but had moved on without incident after discovering the family was visiting relatives in town. "Sheriff thinks they're scouting isolated properties," Deputy Collins reported, "looking for easy targets with minimal resistance." The information was both reassuring and concerning, suggesting the gang wasn't randomly attacking but selecting vulnerable locations, yet also confirming they were indeed in the area and active. "We'll maintain our vigilance," Virgil assured the deputy. "Please thank the sheriff for sending you to check on us." After Collins departed, life at the ranch settled into a strange new pattern, normal activities continuing under a shadow of potential threat. Hope remained, her presence becoming increasingly natural in the household as she assisted with meals, supervised the children's lessons, and helped monitor Timmy's recovery. The evening of the second day found them sitting together on the porch after the children were asleep, sharing coffee as they kept watch over the moonlit yard. A comfortable silence had fallen between them, broken only by the occasional night sounds of the ranch. "Tell me about Chicago," Virgil said suddenly, curious about the life she had left behind. Hope's expression grew thoughtful as she cradled her cup between slender hands. "It's a city of contrasts, great wealth and terrible poverty, often within blocks of each other. After the fire in '71, they rebuilt with such determination. There's an energy there, a sense of possibility that I admire." "Yet you left," Virgil observed. "Yes," she gazed out at the darkened landscape. "After my mother died, the house felt empty, and the hospital work, while meaningful, began to wear on my spirit. Too much suffering, too many people beyond help." "So you became a teacher instead," Virgil prompted. Hope smiled softly. "I had always loved learning, and my father believed strongly in education. Teaching seemed a way to honor him while still doing something valuable." She turned to look at Virgil directly. "And I wanted a fresh start, somewhere far from memories and expectations." The admission resonated with his own journey west years earlier, seeking distance from the pain of his parents' deaths and the chance to build something entirely his own. "I understand that impulse," he acknowledged. "The West offers a certain freedom to reinvent oneself." "Is that what you did?" Hope asked, her question gentle but direct. Reinvented yourself as the solitary rancher who needs no attachments. The perception was uncomfortably accurate. Virgil considered deflecting but found himself answering honestly instead. After my parents died, I decided that self-reliance was the only safe path. Needing no one meant risking no further loss. A logical defense, Hope acknowledged, but a lonely existence. It was sufficient, Virgil replied, then corrected himself. Or I believed it was, until 5 children upended everything. Hope's laugh was soft in the darkness. Children have a way of revealing the inadequacies in our carefully constructed lives, don't they? All the walls we build for protection suddenly seem like barriers to what matters most. The observation cut closer to the bone than Virgil cared to admit. He had indeed constructed walls, physical ones in the form of his isolated ranch, emotional ones in his careful distance from town life and relationships. Yet the children had bypassed those defenses effortlessly, and now Hope Caldwell seemed equally capable of seeing through them. You speak as though from experience, he observed, curious about her own history. Hope was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. I was engaged once in Chicago, she said finally. To another doctor at the hospital, brilliant, dedicated, from a prominent family, it seemed the perfect match. Virgil waited, sensing there was more to the story. We had our future planned so carefully, Hope continued, her voice softening with memory. A practice together, a home in the better part of the city, eventually children. But then, she paused, and Virgil could see her gathering herself. Then I became ill with a fever that nearly killed me. When I recovered, the doctors told me the infection had damaged certain organs, that I would never be able to bear children. The revelation hung in the night air between them, heavy with unspoken pain. My fiancé was understanding initially, Hope continued, but his family valued lineage highly. They needed an heir and I could not provide one. The engagement ended 6 months later. I'm sorry, Virgil said, the simple words inadequate for the injustice of her experience. Hope's smile was sad but without bitterness. It was for the best, truly. He wasn't unkind, but the knowledge came between us. He began to treat me differently, more gently, as though I were somehow damaged. Her expression hardened slightly. I didn't want pity. I wanted a partner who saw me as whole, children or no children. The courage in her straightforward recounting touched something deep in Virgil's heart. This woman had faced loss and disappointment, yet maintained both her dignity and her capacity to care for others. The resilience required was remarkable. That's why you came west, he realized, not just for a fresh start, but to create a life where your worth wasn't measured by your ability to bear children. Hope nodded, clearly appreciating his understanding. Teaching allows me to nurture the next generation in a different way, and the frontier needs educated women far more than Chicago drawing rooms do. They fell silent again, the shared confidences creating a new intimacy between them. Virgil found himself seeing Hope Caldwell with fresh eyes, not just as the capable schoolteacher or the medical helper, but as a woman who had faced her own griefs and made conscious choices about how to rebuild her life afterward. Thank you for telling me, he said finally. It can't have been easy to share something so personal. There's a freedom in speaking truthfully, Hope replied, in letting someone else know who you really are beyond the roles we play. The moment felt significant, a turning point in their evolving relationship. Virgil sensed that his response now would either build a bridge between them or maintain the careful distance he had always preserved with others. Before he could choose his words, however, the sound of approaching horses shattered the quiet night. Multiple riders moving fast and without lights, a combination that instantly put him on alert. Inside, he said tersely, rising and reaching for his rifle. Wake Samuel and get the children to the root cellar. Hope moved immediately, asking no questions as she hurried into the house. Virgil stepped into the shadows of the porch, positioning himself where he could observe without being easily spotted. The riders, 4 of them, as best he could count in the darkness, slowed as they approached the ranch yard, spreading out in a manner that suggested military or outlaw experience. Their intentions were clear from their furtive movements and the rifles visible in their hands. Virgil's mind raced, calculating odds and options. 4 against 1 were poor odds under any circumstances, but with 5 children and hope to protect, the situation was dire. His best hope was to convince them the ranch was too well defended to be worth the trouble. Taking careful aim at the ground near the lead rider, Virgil fired a warning shot that kicked up dust in the moonlight. The sharp crack of the rifle shattered the night silence, causing the horses to rear in surprise and their riders to curse loudly. "That's far enough," Virgil called, keeping his position in the shadows. "This property is defended. Turn around now and no one gets hurt." A harsh laugh came from one of the riders. "Hear that, boys? The rancher thinks he can scare us off with one rifle." The voice carried the rough edge of someone accustomed to violence. "How many men you got in there, rancher?" "Enough," Virgil replied steadily, though his heart hammered in his chest. "And the sheriff knows you're in the area. His deputy visited today and will be back at dawn." This information caused a brief consultation among the riders, their voices too low for Virgil to catch the words. Finally, the leader called out again. "Here's how this goes, rancher. You throw out any cash and valuables you got and we'll be on our way. No need for anyone to get hurt." "Nothing here worth dying for," Virgil responded, keeping his rifle trained on the speaker. "Just a working ranch with barely enough to feed the hands." Inside the house, he knew Hope would be gathering the children, ushering them toward the relative safety of the root cellar accessible through the kitchen floor. He needed to buy them time, keep the outlaws talking rather than shooting or charging the house. "We'll be the judge of what's worth taking," the outlaw leader replied, his tone hardening. "One way or another we're coming in. How it goes is up to you." Virgil's mind raced through options, each more desperate than the last. He could continue the pretense of multiple defenders, but the outlaws would likely call his bluff. He could offer to bring valuables out, buying more time but ultimately delaying the inevitable confrontation. Or he could take a stand here, knowing the odds heavily favored the attackers. The decision was made for him when one of the riders suddenly spurred his horse forward, apparently tired of talking. Virgil fired again, this time aiming for the man rather than the ground. The outlaw cried out and fell from his saddle, clutching his shoulder. "Next one won't be a shoulder wound," Virgil warned, cycling another round into the chamber. "Last chance to ride away." The leader cursed viciously, his patience clearly exhausted. "Kill him," he ordered, and the night erupted in gunfire. Virgil ducked behind a porch post as bullets splintered wood around him. He returned fire methodically, aiming for silhouettes against the night sky. A second outlaw fell, this one silent as he hit the ground, but the others were moving, circling to flank the house from different directions. Retreating inside, Virgil barred the door and moved quickly from window to window, firing when he had a clear shot, conscious of his dwindling ammunition and the worsening odds. A bullet grazed his arm, tearing his sleeve and leaving a burning trail across his skin. Another shattered a window, sending glass fragments across the floor. The attackers were closing in, their confidence growing as they realized he was indeed alone. Virgil knew he couldn't hold them off indefinitely. His priority now was reaching the root cellar, making a final stand to protect those hidden there. As he moved toward the kitchen, a new sound cut through the chaos of gunfire, hoofbeats, many of them approaching fast from the direction of town. For a moment, Virgil thought the outlaws had reinforcements, and his heart sank. But then came a welcome voice amplified by the night air. "This is Sheriff Miller, you're surrounded, drop your weapons." The sudden arrival of law enforcement, the sheriff had apparently gathered a substantial posse, changed the dynamic instantly. The outlaws, caught in the open and now outnumbered, found themselves in an untenable position. What followed was brief but intense, a flurry of shots, shouts, and the thunder of horses as the remaining outlaws attempted to flee only to be cut off by the sheriff's men. Within minutes it was over. 3 attackers were in custody, 1 dead, and the sheriff's posse had suffered only minor injuries. "Xavier," Sheriff Miller called, approaching the house cautiously. "You alive in there?" Virgil opened the door, his rifle still at the ready until he confirmed it was indeed the sheriff. "We're here," he replied, the adrenaline of battle beginning to ebb, leaving him shaky but clear-headed. "The children." "I need to check on the children," he said, turning back toward the kitchen without waiting for the sheriff's response. The root cellar access was hidden beneath a rug, its heavy wooden door designed to protect stores from both weather and pests. Virgil knelt beside it, calling softly, "Hope, it's over, you can come out now." The door lifted slowly, Hope's face appearing in the opening, pale, but composed in the dim light of the lantern she held. "Is it safe?" she asked, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Yes," Virgil assured her. "The sheriff arrived with reinforcements. The outlaws are either captured or dead." Relief washed over Hope's features as she turned to the children huddled behind her. "Did you hear that? Mr. Virgil and the sheriff have kept us safe. We can come up now." One by one they emerged from the cramped space, first Samuel, his arm protectively around little Michael, then Emma and Rose holding hands tightly, and finally Timmy, pale from his illness but alert with the excitement of danger now past. "You're hurt," Hope exclaimed, noticing the blood staining Virgil's sleeve. "Just a graze," he dismissed, though the wound was beginning to throb now that the immediate danger had passed. His attention was focused entirely on the children, checking each one visually for any sign of harm or excessive fear. To his surprise, they seemed remarkably composed, looking to him with expressions of relief rather than terror. Even little Michael, at just 3 years old, showed more curiosity than fright as he surveyed the disrupted main room with its shattered window and bullet-marked walls. "You were very brave," Emma told him solemnly, her 9-year-old dignity somehow making the praise more meaningful than any adult's words could have been. "As were all of you," Virgil replied, unexpectedly moved by their resilience. "Especially Samuel, who helped Miss Caldwell get everyone to safety." The boy straightened at this acknowledgement, his chest puffing slightly with pride. "I remembered what you said, Mr. Virgil. About protecting the little ones." Sheriff Miller entered then, his weathered face grave as he surveyed the scene. "Everyone all right in here?" "We're fine, Sheriff," Hope answered, though her eyes remained on Virgil's injured arm. "Thanks to your timely arrival and Mr. Xavier's defense." Miller nodded, removing his hat. "One of your hands rode into town not 30 minutes after I left yesterday, said he'd spotted suspicious men watching the ranch from the ridge. I gathered every able body I could find." Virgil felt a surge of gratitude toward Tom Reynolds, the neighboring rancher who occasionally helped with cattle drives and must have been passing by on his way home. "Remind me to thank Reynolds properly when next I see him." "Do that," the sheriff agreed. "His warning likely saved lives tonight." He glanced at the children, now clustered around Hope as she checked each one for injuries or signs of shock. "Miss Caldwell, perhaps you could take the young ones to another room while I discuss some matters with Xavier." Understanding the sheriff's desire to shield the children from potentially disturbing details, Hope nodded. "Of course. Children, let's prepare some warm milk in the kitchen while the men talk." Once they had gone, Miller's expression turned more serious. "The man we killed was Blackburn himself, the gang leader I warned you about. The others are his lieutenants. With them captured or dead, the threat should be eliminated." "Good," Virgil said simply, the relief profound but secondary to his concern for his household. "You handled yourself well," Miller continued, his tone reflecting professional approval. 4 against 1 are poor odds, yet you held them off long enough for help to arrive and managed to wound 2 in the process." Virgil shrugged, uncomfortable with praise for what had simply been necessary. "I had people depending on me." The sheriff studied him thoughtfully, seeming to weigh his next words. "That's precisely my point, Xavier. A few months ago you were a solitary rancher with, by your own admission, temporary guardianship of some orphans. Now you're fighting like a man defending his family." The observation struck closer to the truth than Virgil was prepared to acknowledge, especially in his current exhausted state. "They were in my care," he said neutrally. "Any man would have done the same." Miller's expression suggested he wasn't convinced by this deflection, but he didn't press the issue. "I'll leave 2 deputies here overnight just as a precaution. We'll need statements from you and Miss Caldwell in the morning, but that can wait until you've all had some rest." After the sheriff had gone to give instructions to his men, Virgil sank into a chair, the events of the night catching up with him now that the immediate danger had passed. His arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed it, and the weight of responsibility, 5 young lives and 1 courageous woman, all depending on his protection, settled heavily on his shoulders. Hope returned to find him thus, her expression softening as she took in his exhausted posture. The children are settled with warm milk and some of Mrs. Tanner's cookies I found in the pantry, she reported, moving to his side. Now let me see that arm properly. Too weary to argue, Virgil allowed her to examine the wound, wincing slightly as she cleaned it with water from a basin she had brought. It's not deep, she assessed, her touch gentle but clinical, but it needs cleaning and bandaging to prevent infection. From a pocket in her skirt, she produced a small packet. I always carry basic medical supplies. Old habits from hospital days. As she worked, Virgil found himself studying her face, the concentration in her eyes, the slight furrow between her brows as she focused on her task. Despite the night's danger and disruption, her hands remained steady, her movements precise. You were remarkable tonight, he said quietly, getting the children to safety, keeping them calm in the root cellar. I can't imagine how frightening it must have been for all of you. Hope's eyes met his briefly before returning to her bandaging. It was frightening, she acknowledged honestly, but also clarifying. Danger has a way of stripping away pretense, showing what truly matters. And what did it show you? Virgil asked, curious despite his exhaustion, her hands stilled for a moment. That I care deeply about what happens in this house, to the children and to you. The admission was simple but profound in its implications. And you, what did tonight clarify for you? Virgil considered the question, finding unexpected honesty rising within him. That the fiction I've maintained about the children being a temporary responsibility, about my preference for solitude, has become exactly that. A fiction. The words hung between them, the most direct acknowledgement he had ever made of the transformation occurring in his life and heart. Hope's expression warmed with understanding as she secured the bandage around his arm. Sometimes it takes a moment of crisis to recognize the truth we've been avoiding, she observed softly. Though I admit I would have preferred a less dangerous epiphany on your behalf. A tired smile tugged at Virgil's mouth. As would I, he reached out impulsively with his uninjured arm, capturing her hand in his. Thank you, Hope, not just for tonight, but for seeing what I was too stubborn to acknowledge. The touch seemed to surprise her, but she didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers curled gently around his, the connection offering comfort they both needed after the night's events. Mr. Virgil, Emma's voice came from the kitchen doorway. Is it all right if we come back now? Michael's getting sleepy. Virgil released Hope's hand, though the moment's significance lingered between them. Of course, Emma, it's safe now. As the children filed back into the room, their faces showing equal parts excitement and fatigue, Virgil was struck by how naturally they looked to both him and Hope for reassurance. They had begun to function as a unit, adults and children together, bound by shared experience and growing affection. I think it's time everyone returned to bed, Hope suggested gently. It's been quite an eventful night, and you all need rest. Can we stay out here a little longer? Rose asked, her small voice hesitant. Just until we're sure the bad men are really gone. Virgil exchanged a glance with Hope, seeing his own understanding mirrored in her eyes. The children needed reassurance, a moment to process the danger now past in the safety of adult presence. Just for a little while, he agreed, making room as they clustered around his chair and Hope's, seeking the security of proximity. As the night deepened around the ranch house, now guarded by the sheriff's deputies outside, the unlikely family unit drew closer together. Tomorrow would bring statements to the sheriff, repairs to the damaged house, and a return to normal routines. But tonight had changed something fundamental, stripping away pretenses and revealing connections too strong to deny any longer. Virgil looked across the gathered children to Hope, finding her watching him with an expression that suggested she understood precisely what he was feeling. The fiction of temporary arrangements and emotional distance had been exposed for what it was. Now came the more challenging task of building something genuine and lasting in its place. The aftermath of the outlaw attack brought a whirlwind of activity to the Xavier Ranch. Sheriff Miller returned the following morning to take formal statements, bringing news that the captured gang members had already implicated themselves in numerous crimes across the territory. The threat they had posed was truly eliminated, bringing relief to the entire community. Word of Virgil's defense of his home spread quickly, transforming his reputation in Galton Creek from solitary recluse to heroic protector. Neighbors began appearing at the ranch, offering assistance with repairs to the bullet-damaged house and bringing food for the household. The community's response was overwhelming to a man who had deliberately kept himself apart for so long. Through it all, Hope Caldwell remained, postponing the reopening of school for several days to help the Xavier household recover from both Timmy's illness and the traumatic attack. Her presence became a cornerstone of stability for the children, who looked to her with increasing affection and trust. For Virgil, the experience had forced a reckoning he could no longer avoid. The fiction of temporary guardianship had been exposed by his own actions. His willingness to risk his life to protect the children revealed deeper attachments than he had been prepared to acknowledge. Similarly, his growing feelings for Hope could no longer be dismissed as mere appreciation for her help with the children. 3 days after the attack, with the house repairs well underway and a semblance of normalcy returning, Virgil found Hope on the porch at sunset, watching the children play in the yard. The golden light of evening softened her features, highlighting the rich brown of her hair and the thoughtful curve of her lips. "You're returning to town tomorrow," he observed, joining her at the railing. It wasn't a question. They both knew school needed to resume, and her extended absence from her boarding house was already the subject of town gossip. "Yes," she confirmed, a certain reluctance evident in her tone. "The children have shown remarkable resilience, and Timmy is well enough now for normal activities. It's time." Virgil nodded, struggling with emotions he had spent years suppressing. "The children will miss you," he said finally, the words inadequate for what he truly wanted to express. Hope turned to face him, her expression gentle but direct. "And you, Virgil? Will you miss me as well?" The question demanded honesty he was only beginning to find the courage for. "Yes," he admitted simply, "more than I expected to, more than I believed possible, given how determined I've been to need no one." A small smile touched her lips. "Needing others isn't weakness, you know. It's perhaps the most human strength we possess, the ability to form connections that sustain us through life's hardships." "I'm beginning to understand that," Virgil acknowledged, his gaze moving to where the children played. "They've taught me more than I've taught them, I think." "Children often do," Hope agreed. She hesitated, then added more softly, "What will you do now, about them, I mean?" It was the question at the heart of everything, the one he had been avoiding since the first orphan arrived at his door. "I've been telling myself and everyone else that their stay here was temporary," he began slowly. "That proper families would be found, arrangements made, but the truth is, I stopped looking for alternatives months ago." The admission felt like a weight lifting from his shoulders, the relief of finally speaking a truth he had known in his heart but resisted acknowledging. "They belong here," he continued with growing certainty. "With me, and I belong with them. I want to adopt them formally, legally, make them Xaviers in name as well as in fact." Hope's eyes brightened with unshed tears at his declaration. "They already are Xaviers in every way that matters, but I'm so glad you've recognized it too." "I have you to thank for that clarity," Virgil said, his voice roughening with emotion. "You saw what I was trying so hard not to see, that we had already become a family when I wasn't looking." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the children's game, their laughter carrying across the yard in the golden evening light. There was more to say, questions about the future, about Hope's place in it, about possibilities neither had dared consider openly, but for this moment the shared understanding was enough. "Will you come to dinner on Sunday?" Virgil asked finally. "After church, the children would love to have you visit, and I would value the opportunity to talk further about many things." Hope's smile was warm with promise. "I would like that very much, Virgil Xavier." As she returned to town the following day, the schoolhouse reopened and life in Galton Creek resumed its normal rhythms. But for Virgil and the children, everything had changed. The fiction of temporariness had been abandoned, replaced by open acknowledgement of the family they had become. Virgil rode into town later that week to speak with Judge Parker, the circuit judge who handled legal matters for the county, about formal adoption proceedings. The judge, a practical man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, listened to Virgil's story with growing interest. 5 children is an unusual number for a single man to adopt, he observed when Virgil had finished explaining the circumstances. The court typically prefers traditional family arrangements. I understand that, Your Honor, Virgil replied, maintaining his composure despite the anxiety churning inside him. But these children have already lost their original families. They've found stability and belonging at my ranch. Separating them now or delaying recognition of our family bond would only cause additional trauma. The judge considered this, tapping his pen thoughtfully against his desk. You make a compelling point, Mr. Xavier, and I've heard reports of your defense of these children during the recent outlaw incident. Actions speak louder than conventional arrangements in my courtroom. Relief flooded through Virgil as the judge continued, I'll initiate the paperwork today. Barring any unforeseen complications, the adoptions could be finalized within 2 months. 2 months, the timeframe seemed both eternal and instantaneous for a decision that would legally formalize what his heart had already accepted. Thank you, Judge Parker, Virgil said, extending his hand. This means everything to us, to our family. The word fell naturally from his lips now, no longer a concept he resisted but an identity he embraced. As Virgil left the judge's office, he found himself walking toward the schoolhouse without conscious decision. It was nearly 3 o'clock, and he could collect the children directly rather than waiting for them to make the journey home with Mrs. Tanner's son, who had been escorting them since school resumed. The schoolyard was quiet when he arrived, lessons still in progress inside the white clapboard building. Virgil hesitated, then decided to wait on the porch rather than interrupt. Through the window, he could see Hope moving among the rows of desks, her expression animated as she explained something to the assembled students. She looked in her element here, Virgil realized, confident, purposeful, sharing her knowledge with the next generation. It was one of the many qualities he had come to admire about her, the certainty of her calling, the dedication she brought to her chosen work. The past few days without her constant presence at the ranch had clarified something else for Virgil, that his feelings for Hope Caldwell had grown far beyond gratitude or admiration. He had begun to envision a future with her as part of it, not just as the children's teacher but as something more personal, more permanent. But her revelation about her inability to bear children complicated these emerging feelings. Not because it diminished her worth in his eyes. If anything, the courage with which she had rebuilt her life after such disappointment only increased his respect for her. Rather, it was the uncertainty of how she might receive any overture from a man who had already acquired 5 children. Would she see his interest as genuine, or merely as convenience, a ready-made family for a woman who couldn't have children of her own? The school bell rang, interrupting Virgil's thoughts as children began pouring out of the building. Hope appeared in the doorway, surprise and pleasure lighting her features when she spotted him waiting. Mr. Xavier, she greeted him, using his formal name in the presence of students and parents. What a pleasant surprise. Miss Caldwell, he replied with equal formality, though his smile conveyed more personal warmth. I was in town on business and thought I'd collect the children directly. Emma spotted him first, her face brightening as she hurried across the schoolyard. Mr. Virgil, did you talk to the judge? What did he say? The direct question, posed loudly enough for nearby parents to overhear, drew curious glances. Virgil placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder, guiding her slightly away from the crowd. Yes, I spoke with Judge Parker, he confirmed in a lower voice. We'll discuss the details at home with everyone together. Hope observed the exchange with interest, clearly curious about his business with the judge but too discreet to ask in the current setting. The children have all had excellent days, she reported as Samuel, Rose, and Timmy joined them. Timmy's participation was especially impressive, considering his recent illness. The boy beamed at the praise, standing a little straighter. Miss Caldwell says I answered the most questions in arithmetic today. Well done, Virgil commended him, feeling a surge of pride that now, finally, he allowed himself to embrace rather than temper with reminders of temporary arrangements. As the schoolyard emptied, Hope moved closer, lowering her voice. Is everything all right, Virgil? You seem different today. He nodded, aware of the children's curious gazes. Better than all right. But it's a longer conversation than we can have here. He hesitated, then added, we're still expecting you for Sunday dinner. I wouldn't miss it, she assured him, her smile suggesting she understood there was more to discuss than could be said in their current surroundings. The ride home was filled with the children's excited questions about his meeting with the judge, which Virgil answered with deliberate patience, wanting them to understand the significance of what was happening. "So we'll really be Xaviers?" Samuel asked, his young face serious as he absorbed the information, legally and everything. "Yes," Virgil confirmed, "if that's what you all want. The judge will need to speak with each of you to ensure you understand and agree to the adoption." "But what about our real names?" Rose asked, her voice small with uncertainty. "My mama gave me my name." Virgil considered this, understanding the concern beneath the question. "Your full names will be preserved," he assured her. "Rose Campbell Xavier, honoring both the family you came from and the family you're joining." The explanation seemed to satisfy her, though Virgil made a mental note to speak with each child individually about preserving memories of their original families. It was important they understood that joining his family didn't erase their past connections but added new ones. "Does Miss Caldwell know," Emma asked as they neared the ranch, "about the adoption?" "Not yet," Virgil replied. "I thought we might tell her together on Sunday." The children exchanged glances that suggested some private communication Virgil couldn't quite decipher. "That's a good idea," Emma said finally, with a solemnity that seemed to speak for all of them. Sunday arrived with clear skies and mild autumn weather, perfect for the dinner that had taken on unexpectedly significant dimensions in Virgil's mind. The children had thrown themselves into preparations with unprecedented enthusiasm, cleaning the house, setting the table with their best dishes, and even picking wildflowers for a centerpiece. "It's just Miss Caldwell," Virgil observed with amusement, as Emma carefully arranged napkins folded into elaborate triangles she had learned from Mrs. Tanner. "She's been here before, you know." "But this is different," the girl insisted with 9-year-old certainty. "This is a celebration." Virgil couldn't argue with that assessment. The pending adoptions were indeed cause for celebration, though he sensed the children's excitement might encompass additional hopes regarding their teacher's visit. Hope arrived promptly after church services, looking particularly lovely in a dress of deep green that complemented her complexion and brought out the rich tones in her brown hair. She carried a basket covered with a checkered cloth which she presented to an eager Rose. "Apple tarts," she explained with a smile, "my mother's recipe which I thought might be appropriate for our gathering today." The meal that followed was filled with laughter and animated conversation as the children vied to share their latest achievements and discoveries with their teacher. Virgil found himself watching Hope throughout the meal, noting how naturally she engaged with each child, drawing out the quieter ones while gently moderating the more exuberant contributors to ensure everyone was heard. "I think it's time for our news," Emma announced as they finished the main course, looking to Virgil for confirmation. He nodded, recognizing that the children were eager to share their changing status. "As you know, I visited Judge Parker earlier this week," he began, addressing Hope directly. "It was about formally adopting the children." Hope's expression brightened with understanding. "Oh, that's wonderful news, Virgil." The judge was receptive. "Very," he confirmed. "The adoptions should be finalized within 2 months, barring any complications. The children will legally be Xaviers." "We'll be a real family," Rose added importantly. "With papers and everything." Hope's smile encompassed all of them. "You're already a real family in all the ways that truly matter, but I'm so pleased it will be officially recognized." "There's a celebration at the courthouse when adoptions are finalized," Samuel informed her, clearly repeating information Virgil had shared, "with cake and everything." "That sounds wonderful," Hope replied, her eyes meeting Virgil's over the children's heads. A fitting recognition of what's been true for some time. The warmth in her gaze suggested she understood the significance of his decision to formalize the relationships that had been developing despite his initial resistance. It was an acknowledgement of growth, of his willingness to embrace connection rather than avoid it out of fear. After the meal, the younger children scattered to various activities while Emma and Samuel helped clear the table. Virgil took the opportunity to invite Hope for a walk, suggesting they check on a new foal born the previous week. The early October afternoon was pleasantly warm, the landscape painted in the rich hues of autumn. As they walked toward the small pasture where the mare and foal grazed, Virgil found himself searching for the right words to express what had been growing in his heart. "The children are thrilled about the adoption," Hope observed, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "It gives them the security they've needed, knowing they truly belong somewhere with someone." "They've belonged here for some time," Virgil acknowledged. "I was just too stubborn or frightened to admit it." Hope's glance was understanding rather than judgmental. Fear of loss is a powerful deterrent to connection, especially for someone who has experienced as much loss as you have. They reached the pasture fence, leaning against it side by side as they watched the mare and her foal. The young horse was all legs and energy, cantering in circles around his more sedate mother. "What changed your mind?" Hope asked after a moment, her gaze still on the horses. "About the adoption, I mean." Virgil considered the question, wanting to give her the honesty she deserved. "Many things. The outlaw attack clarified what was truly important, and our conversation that night about how I'd been maintaining the fiction of temporariness out of fear rather than conviction." He turned to face her more directly. "But mostly it was seeing the family we had already become, despite my best efforts to prevent it. The children needed a father, and somewhere along the way, I discovered I needed them just as much." Hope's expression softened at his admission. "That's the paradox of love, isn't it? What seems like vulnerability, opening ourselves to others, actually becomes our greatest strength." "I'm beginning to understand that," Virgil agreed. He hesitated, then added more carefully, "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you, Hope, something personal." She turned to face him fully, her expression curious but encouraging. "I'm listening." Virgil took a deep breath, gathering courage for words he had never expected to speak again after losing his parents and committing himself to solitude. "These past months, getting to know you, seeing your kindness with the children, your courage during the attack, I've developed feelings I didn't think possible anymore." Hope's eyes widened slightly, but she remained silent, allowing him to continue. "I respect you tremendously," he went on, finding his way carefully through unfamiliar emotional territory. "Your intelligence, your dedication to teaching, your medical knowledge, all of it, but it's more than respect. I find myself thinking of you constantly, wondering what you would say about situations that arise, imagining your presence in our home not just as an occasional visitor, but as something more permanent." He paused, searching her face for any indication of her reaction. "I realize this may seem sudden, or perhaps even calculated given what you shared about your inability to have children. I want you to know that isn't a factor in my feelings. If anything, your honesty about that part of your life only increased my admiration for your strength." Hope's expression had grown increasingly complex as he spoke, surprise giving way to something warmer, though still guarded. "What exactly are you saying, Virgil?" she asked softly. "That I care for you," he replied simply, "deeply, that I would like to court you properly if you're amenable, to explore whether what I feel might be reciprocated and whether there might be a future for us together with the children." The directness of his declaration hung in the air between them, vulnerable and unretractable. Hope was silent for a long moment, her gaze dropping to her hands where they rested on the fence rail. "When I came west," she began slowly, "I had convinced myself that I was content with my independence. That being a teacher was fulfillment enough, that I didn't need the traditional life that had been denied me in Chicago." She looked up, meeting his gaze with newfound openness. "And then I met a stubborn rancher and 5 remarkable children who challenged all those careful assumptions." Hope's expression softened further as she continued, "I care for you too, Virgil. More than I expected to, more than felt safe initially, and I love those children as if they were my own, but—" The hesitation in her voice sent a chill through Virgil's hopeful heart. "But," he prompted gently. "But I need you to be certain," she said, her voice strengthening with resolve. "Certain that you want me for myself, not just as a mother figure for the children. Certain that my inability to bear more children isn't something you'll come to regret. I couldn't bear to build a life with you, only to see disappointment grow where love once was." The fear beneath her words was palpable, the shadow of her past rejection still influencing her ability to trust in someone's complete acceptance. Virgil understood it immediately, recognizing in her caution the same defensive instinct that had kept him emotionally isolated for so long. "Hope," he said gently, reaching for her hand and finding it trembling slightly beneath his touch. "I have 5 children I never expected, 5 souls who need more love and attention than I sometimes feel capable of providing. The thought of more children has never entered my mind." He squeezed her fingers lightly, willing her to believe his sincerity. "What I want, what the children and I need, isn't your ability to bear children. It's your heart, your mind, your strength. It's the way you see each of them as individuals, the kindness you show even when tired or stressed, the courage you displayed during the attack." Hope's expression began to warm as he continued, his voice growing more certain with each word. "I'm falling in love with you, Hope Caldwell, not as a convenient solution to our family's needs, but as a woman of remarkable character and intellect whom I want to build a life with, whatever shape that life takes." Tears gathered in Hope's eyes, though her smile was brightening. "I never thought to hear such words again," she admitted softly. "After what happened in Chicago, I believed that part of my life was finished." "And now?" Virgil asked, his heart suspended between hope and uncertainty. Hope's free hand rose to touch his face gently, her eyes meeting his with newfound confidence. "Now I find myself falling in love with a man who sees me completely, strengths and limitations, and values me nonetheless. A man who has opened his heart to 5 orphaned children and might have room for one more person who needs belonging." The admission sent warmth cascading through Virgil's chest, a happiness so profound it momentarily robbed him of speech. In the silence, Hope continued, her voice soft but steady. "I would be honored to be courted by you, Virgil Xavier. To explore what might grow between us and to continue being part of these children's lives, whatever form that ultimately takes." "Hope," Virgil began, his voice rough with emotion, but before he could continue, a small voice called from the direction of the house. "Mr. Virgil, Miss Caldwell." It was Rose, running toward them with characteristic enthusiasm. "Michael's awake from his nap and asking for you both." The interruption might have been frustrating under other circumstances, but Virgil found himself smiling instead. This was the reality of family life, precious moments of adult conversation punctuated by the constant, wonderful demands of children. Hope seemed to read his thoughts, laughing softly as she released his hand. "Duty calls," she said with a warm smile. "Shall we?" As they walked back to the house together, Rose skipping ahead of them, Virgil felt a sense of rightness settle over him, a certainty that had been missing from his life for longer than he cared to admit. The path ahead wasn't clear of obstacles, and courting while raising 5 children would present unique challenges. But for the first time in years, he was moving toward connection rather than away from it, embracing possibility rather than guarding against loss. The following weeks brought a gentle transformation to Virgil's life and home. His courtship of Hope proceeded with the measured pace appropriate to their positions in the community and their respective responsibilities. Sunday dinners became a regular tradition, sometimes at the ranch and occasionally at the home of friends in town who were supportive of the developing relationship. The children, far from being surprised by this development, seemed to have anticipated it with the uncanny perception of the young. Emma, in particular, took a proprietary interest in the courtship, offering unsolicited advice about appropriate gifts and behaviors that left Virgil alternately amused and embarrassed. "Mrs. Peterson says a gentleman should bring flowers when calling on a lady," she informed him solemnly one Saturday as he prepared to ride into town for supplies. "And not just any flowers, her favorites." "Is that so?" Virgil replied, hiding a smile as he checked his saddle cinch. "And how would I know Miss Caldwell's favorite flowers?" Emma rolled her eyes with the exasperated patience of one explaining something obvious. "You ask her, of course, or you could ask me, since she already told me when we were picking wildflowers for the table last week." "And what did she say?" Virgil found himself asking, drawn into the child's matchmaking despite himself. "Lilacs," Emma replied promptly. "But since those won't bloom until spring, she also likes daisies and those purple flowers that grow by the creek." Virgil nodded seriously, tucking this information away. "Thank you for the advice, Emma. I'll keep it in mind." The girl beamed, clearly pleased with her role in advancing the romance. Miss Caldwell would make a good mother, she added casually before skipping back to the house, leaving Virgil momentarily speechless at her directness. Yet the observation, innocent as it was, touched on concerns Virgil knew Hope still harbored. Despite his assurances, she remained sensitive about her inability to bear children, occasionally making self-deprecating remarks that suggested lingering insecurity on the subject. She would indeed, Virgil agreed aloud, his eyes lifting to find Hope standing in the doorway. She had evidently overheard the tail end of the conversation, and while she offered Emma a warm smile, Virgil didn't miss the shadow that passed briefly over her eyes, a flicker of old pain that lingered despite his best efforts to banish it. Emma is a determined matchmaker, Hope said lightly, stepping onto the porch and smoothing the girl's braids, and a flatterer. I'm just telling the truth, Emma insisted, leaning into Hope's touch before darting off to join her brothers in the barn. Left alone, Virgil turned to Hope. She's right, you know. You are a natural mother to them. Hope leaned against the porch railing, looking out at the crisp autumn landscape. It's easy to be a mother when the children are as wonderful as yours, Virgil, but loving them and being a mother in the traditional sense are different things in the eyes of the world. Not in my eyes, Virgil said firmly, moving to stand beside her, and not in theirs. The adoption hearing took place 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. The courthouse was crowded not with gawkers but with supporters, Mrs. Peterson, Sheriff Miller, Doc Henderson, and of course Hope. The children sat in a row on a bench, scrubbed and solemn in their Sunday best, their legs swinging nervously. Judge Parker called them up one by one. He asked Emma about her reading, Samuel about his arithmetic, and even gently asked little Michael if he liked living at the ranch. I like the horses, Michael declared loudly. And Papa. The use of the title, spoken with the unthinking confidence of a 3-year-old, silenced the room. Virgil felt a lump form in his throat that made it difficult to breathe. Well, Judge Parker said, clearing his throat and looking over his spectacles at Virgil. It seems the matter is already settled in the hearts of those involved. The court is merely catching up. He signed the papers with a flourish. Congratulations, Mr. Xavier, you have a fine family. The celebration that followed at the ranch was a joyous chaos of food and laughter. Neighbors dropped by with pies and congratulations, welcoming the new Xavier family into the fold of the community permanently. But for Virgil, the day held one more necessary task. As evening fell and the guests departed, leaving the children exhausted but happy in their beds, Virgil asked Hope to stay a moment longer. He led her into the study, the room where she had first proposed their marriage of convenience, a conversation that now seemed a lifetime ago. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light over the leather-bound books. Virgil turned to face her, his heart hammering harder than it had during the outlaw raid. We've built something good here, Hope, he began. We have, she agreed, her eyes soft. The children are safe. They're happy. I'm not talking about the children, Virgil said. I'm talking about us. He stepped closer, taking her hands. You asked me once if I needed a wife. I told you then it was a business arrangement. But I found that I don't want a business partner, Hope. I don't want a housekeeper or a governess. He looked deep into her eyes, seeing the fear warring with the love he knew was there. I want you, he said. I want to wake up every morning and see you across the table. I want to argue about books and share the silence of the evening. I want you to be my wife in every way there is. Hope's breath hitched. She squeezed his hands, her eyes filling with tears. Virgil, I love you, you know I do, but... But what? She pulled her hands away gently, turning to look into the fire. It's one thing to say it doesn't matter now when the house is full of noise and life, but what about later? What about when you want a son of your own blood, a child that is part of you? She turned back to him, the whisper barely audible in the quiet room. I can't have children, Virgil, I can't give you that, I am broken. Virgil crossed the distance between them in 2 strides. He took her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him, to see the absolute certainty in his gaze. Broken, he shook his head, a tender smile curving his lips. Hope, look around you, look at this house. He gestured toward the ceiling, toward the rooms where 5 children lay sleeping, children who had been lost until they found this harbor. I have a son who wants to be a carpenter, he said softly. I have a daughter who reads Shakespeare. I have a baby who calls me Papa. He looked back at her, his thumbs brushing away the tears that spilled onto her cheeks. Good, he smiled, his voice rough with emotion. I've got enough kids for both of us. The joke, delivered with such profound love, shattered the last of her defenses. Hope let out a sob that was half laugh and threw her arms around his neck. Yes, she wept against his chest. Yes, Virgil. He held her tight, anchoring her, anchoring himself. He had thought the frontier demanded solitude, but he had been wrong. It demanded courage, the courage to open your door to strangers, the courage to claim a family not of your blood, and the courage to love a woman who thought she was empty, only to show her she was the one who made the cup run over. Epilogue. Christmas 1885. The Xavier Ranch house was bursting at the seams. The expansion Virgil had built 2 years prior was already filled with the noise and chaos of the holidays. In the main room, a massive pine tree touched the ceiling, decorated with strings of popcorn and paper stars. 15-year-old Emma was directing the placement of the angel, while Samuel, now a lanky 14-year-old, held the ladder for Timmy. Virgil stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching his wife glaze a ham. Hope looked up, her face flushed from the heat of the oven, her eyes bright with happiness. "Stop staring and help me with this platter," she commanded, though her smile took the sting out of the order. Virgil obeyed, moving to her side. He kissed her temple as he took the heavy platter. "Just admiring the view, Mrs. Xavier." "The view involves a lot of flour," she noted, brushing a smudge from her apron. "It involves the center of my world," he corrected. A crash from the other room drew their attention. "Michael," Rose's voice rang out, "that was my ornament." It bounced. Came the indignantly defensive reply of the 9-year-old. Virgil chuckled, the sound deep and contented. He looked at Hope. "Sounds like we're needed." "Always," she said, taking his hand. They walked into the main room together, into the noise and the warmth. Virgil looked at his 5 children, grown tall and strong and secure. He looked at his wife, whose heart had been big enough to hold them all. He thought of the solitary man he had been, the man who believed he needed nothing. He looked at the abundance around him. He had been right about one thing all those years ago. He had enough. He had more than enough. He had everything.